Chapter 4180. As for Xiaohua, he had already held the Grand Cosmos shifting token in his hand. The magic tool flickered with a faint halo that enveloped him. When the heavy spatial energy from the teleportation array landed on this halo, it only caused a slight ripple before disappearing again. At this moment, Xiaohua was activating the teleportation channel while using the going south way north technique. His expression was very cautious and he appeared to be very careful. After experiencing the error in the previous teleportation, Xiaohua already knew that even if his cultivation was at the level of a god, he could not be careless at any time. There were too many accidents in this world, and every unexpected accident would cause a huge change. And this change would happen most of the time. In other words, nothing could be done according to his wishes. Even if he had already built the teleportation channel and used the going south way north technique to discover the Great Snow Mountain's divine sense mark, he still did not have any confidence that he could teleport to the sky above the Great Snow Mountain. In fact, the current Xiaohua did not dare to imagine that he could reach the Great Snow Mountain. He only hoped that he could return to the hidden Immortal continent, Western Paradise, or any place in the Thousand Demons sacred realm, as long as it was related to the three continents. Xiaohua even hoped that he could return to the Dawn Rain continent. That would be even more wonderful. However, these were all extravagant hopes. Xiaohua only hoped that the divine sense mark in the distance would be stable and not like it was now, like a candle in the wind. Fortunately, the teleportation channel had already been going for several hours. Although the divine sense mark was like a candle in the wind, it was still clear and there were no signs of it disappearing. This made Xiaohua rather gratified. However, this teleportation channel was really long. It felt even longer than when he went from the heavenly prison to the ruins. Xiaohua had never experienced such a long teleportation in his life. When the teleportation channel had already become a habit, Xiaohua suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. This was because the closer the distance, the clearer the divine sense mark should be. However, in Xiaohua's soul technique, the divine sense mark of the Great Snow Mountain was always like that, either far nor near. Even after several hours of teleportation, it was still so far away, like a natural star, forever beautiful but forever untouchable. Just as Xiaohua's doubts appeared, the entire teleportation channel suddenly began to tremble. The space around Xiaohua released a trembling sound. Xiaohua was greatly alarmed. The soul strands on his forehead surged out like a swarm of bees and landed on the transportation channel where the green seal characters were crazily surging. However, before the teleportation passageway could stabilize for a few breaths of time, a strange creaking sound was heard again. It was like a wooden boat being unable to bear the weight of the waves. After that, Xiaohua watched helplessly as the teleportation passageway seemed to be stretched by a large hand. Even his own body became flat and slender along with the passageway. Ah! Xiaohua tried to call out. His voice was very soft, but it was also extremely long. When Xiaohua's figure was distorted by the time, and every part of his body was fluctuating to different degrees, Xiaohua understood that he was once again in a turbulent flow of time. Of course, Xiaohua wasn't surprised at all by this situation. Furthermore, he wasn't alarmed but happy instead. The existence of the turbulent flow of time made it clear that he wanted to leave the ruins, leave the star field where the ruins were located. In other words, he wanted to leave the upper realm where the primordial spirit was cultivated and return to the hidden immortal continent where he was familiar with cultivating the nascent soul. However, when the four walls of the teleportation channel slowly became transparent, the green seal characters, runes, and even the fluctuations of magic power were slowly erased. Xiaohua himself was distorted to the point where he was almost unrecognizable. Perhaps he was just like a light shadow or a fluctuation. Only then did Xiaohua start to feel fear. At this moment, his magic power disappeared, his divine sense disappeared, his soul consciousness disappeared, and the soul technique that controlled the teleportation channel disappeared. Even his thoughts were slowly being pulled out. His eyes were pitch black. A deathly stillness that was even quieter than the heavenly prison began to pass through his body and rush into his mind. He couldn't control his own body, and he couldn't control his steps even more. A kind of ignorant terror pervaded Xiaohua's heart. He was like a mortal walking alone in a pitch-black mountain in the middle of a pitch-black night. Xiaohua was fearful of the unknown things in front of him. What is that? Just when Xiaohua was feeling helpless, in the boundless darkness, he saw a hazy brilliance. A ribbon of light appeared in Xiaohua's vision. This light knot was very strange. It was like a complete ribbon of light that was cut off. Moreover, it twisted at the place where it was cut off and reconnected again. Above this time knot, rays of light that were as bright as swimming fish flickered and surged. These rays of light didn't need to leave one side of the light knot and could easily flow to the other side. Xiaohua was a little dumbstruck by this sight. Seeing the light knot, Xiaohua's figure suddenly sped up. His distorted figure was even more like a light shadow being cut apart, turning into pieces. Ah? Could it be that I'm still in the teleportation channel? Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. But in this space-time turbulence, I can no longer see the teleportation channel? Just when Xiaohua came to a realization, he suddenly lowered his head again. He pulled his gaze away from the vision in the distance, and looked at his own body. At this time, his body was no longer in shape. It had already turned into pieces of light shadows. These light shadows didn't follow any rules. Moreover, as the teleportation channel sped up, these light shadows were cut again, turning into smaller light shadows. This happened a few times. Before the light knot, Xiaohua's figure was already formed from small particles. Xiaohua suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He recalled the time when he followed Fairy Hong Xia into the ancestral shrine star in the millions of Ming Mountains. At that time, didn't he turn into a particle? Could it be that, by turning into a particle, I can fly faster? Could it be that in this star field, only the particle form is the best state to fly? Xiaohua's almost stagnant mind rumbled as he thought of his light escape. Allowing the body to be light is an escape. Light is formless and intangible. How can I allow the body to be light? Since light can shine in this star field, could it be that light is also in the form of particles? Xiaohua seemed to have touched the door of light escape. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to think about it because his figure was really like a lightning bolt, rushing towards the huge light knot. In just a moment, Xiaohua had already arrived in front of the light knot. On the contrary, when he got closer, Xiaohua could no longer see the shape of the light knot. He could only see that the light knot was vast and boundless. On one side of the light knot, there was a tide of light more majestic than the sea surging violently. Every time it moved, there would be endless fluctuations rushing out from the light spot. Xiaohua was very familiar with these fluctuations. They were the fluctuations of time in the heavenly prison. Although Xiaohua's ears couldn't hear any sound, the rumbling sound that reached the heavens and earth resounded in his heart. This sound could almost destroy all the sounds in the world. How is this possible? Xiaohua was dumbstruck as he looked at the miracle between heaven and earth. Even in the incomparably mysterious heavenly prison, all he could see was the brilliance produced by the intersection of several different time domains. This brilliance was already extremely rare and had already benefited him greatly. He had never thought that besides the heavenly prison, in this mysterious space, there would actually be time turbulence that surpassed the heavenly prison's time domain. And what made him especially puzzled was that the mark of the great snow mountain's spiritual sense that he sensed was actually within the chaotic and incomprehensible time turbulence. Moreover, his spiritual sense mark was like a candle in the wind, not far nor near. Damn it, it must be the law of time. Xiaohua suddenly understood. Only the law of time can surpass the law of space and allow the spiritual sense mark of the great snow mountain to maintain a constant distance. Could it be that the 3 continents are within the light knot? The 3 continents are actually so mysterious? As Xiaohua pondered, his figure once again rushed into the knot of light. As Xiaohua's speed increased, strange lights and shadows flashed before his eyes like lightning. Within these lights and shadows, there were endless illusions. There were continents, mountains, rivers, and battles of life and death. All kinds of strange and motley things appeared one after another in the lights and shadows. Boom! When Xiaohua crashed into the knot of light, countless voices once again rushed into his mind. Of course, these voices were merely like thunder, and after flashing past, they immediately became silent. Moreover, around Xiaohua's body that had already turned into particles, endless light dots drowned Xiaohua like a tide of light. It was as if only Xiaohua existed in this world at this time. Sensing that every particle on his body was emitting a kind of fluctuation, Xiaohua really wanted to cry but had no tears. He wanted to take this opportunity to comprehend some of the law of time, but the chaotic fluctuations of time made him want to comprehend until he died. Another few moments later, this tide of light produced a small vortex. This vortex gradually condensed into a flow of time as Xiaohua went deeper, wantonly flowing in the light knot. The three continents. Seeing an indistinct continent that seemed to be formed by countless illusions superimposed together in the flow of time, Xiaohua cried out in alarm. It must be! Otherwise, how could this Zhao's divine sense mark appear on it? However, in just a moment, Xiaohua wanted to cry but had no tears. His thoughts were as slow as a crawling snail. Damn it, with such a chaotic flow of time, even if this shall return to the great snow mountain, then who knows when in the hidden immortal continent? Maybe 1,000,000 years ago, maybe 1,000,000 years later. What's the point of this Xiao going back to the hidden immortal continent like this? Unfortunately, even if Xiaohua didn't want to go back, his body that had almost turned into a light shadow still quickly crashed into the continent. Just as he approached one of the illusions on the continent, suddenly, his body of 13,200 particles slightly shook, and the transmission array that had disappeared in the flow of time suddenly reappeared. As if it had bumped into something, it suddenly became unstable. Moreover, just as his body was trembling, a vague image of light and shadow appeared amidst the myriad of light and shadow. -13. Chapter 4181. In this light, a tall and thin figure appeared. At this moment, this figure was lying helplessly, as if he had already fainted. On the left side of this figure, there was a black puppy and a yellow marten. What made Xiaohua especially shocked was that this tall and thin figure's right hand was tightly gripping a sword embryo that he was familiar with. Before Xiaohua could see clearly, the light and shadow shook again, and an indescribable ripple extended behind this figure. It was similar to the ripples of Xiaohua's transmission channel. If nothing unexpected happened, Xiaohua's transmission channel should have collided with the transmission channel that this figure was in, causing an abnormality to occur. The light and shadow shook once, and then the light and shadow disappeared, as if the entire light and shadow had fallen into the forward ripple. The brilliance of the grand cosmos shifting token in Xiaohua's hand shook again, smoothing out the somewhat collapsed transmission channel. As a result, the light and shadow of the transmission channel that Xiaohua was in also immediately disappeared into the torrent of time. Xiaohua was dumbstruck like a wooden chicken. His already slow mind could no longer keep up with what he had just seen. Although it was just a glance and he didn't see anything clearly, he could clearly feel that the figure was so familiar. The little dog and the little marten were also familiar, and there was also that sword embryo. However, he didn't have time to think too much. Another kind of fear arose in his heart. Soul Cultivator Xiaohua's voice shouted in his physical body. Not good! The divine sense mark has disappeared! Xiaohua was shocked. That's right, the divine sense mark that had been faintly discernible before had completely disappeared now. He couldn't sense it at all. It was as if the divine sense mark didn't exist at all. This situation was exactly the same as when Xiaohua had mistakenly entered the ruins. What should we do? Soul Cultivator Xiaohua was somewhat at a loss. Xiaohua's eyes narrowed slightly. Looking at the endless illusory continent in front of him, he made a prompt decision and said, Forget it. We're in the turbulent flow of time, so we're doomed. We can only survive by entering the three continents. Use the going south, going north, going south, going south, going north, going south. All right. Hearing this, the soul cultivator Xiaohua hurriedly urged his soul warrior to activate. Thousands of green seal words flew out and disappeared into the flow of time. But as the green seal words disappeared, Xiaohua's portal continued to move closer to the continent. Mountain ranges and villas could be seen clearly in front of him. Suddenly, an indescribable barrier appeared in front of Xiaohua, preventing him from entering the portal. What's going on? Xiaohua was about to cry. How come the 3 continents don't recognize me? This Xiao has only been away for a few days. Calm down, fellow Taoist, Xiaohua said. We'll try again. Although he was a bit flustered, he forced himself to remain calm. Yes. Clenching his teeth, Xiaohua's soul tendrils flew out from his forehead and surged into the barrier in an attempt to break through. Unfortunately, he didn't know what this barrier was, but it was incomparably tough. No matter how hard Xiaohua tried, he couldn't break through it. Xiaohua could only watch as the continent flashed past his eyes like lightning. Motherfucker! I don't believe this! Xiaohua slapped his forehead and opened his illusion breaker Dharma eye. A round of silver-white pupils appeared, and before the silver-white beam of light could shoot out, the incomparably tough barrier suddenly disappeared. Xiaohua's figure flashed in the light and disappeared into the light and shadow of the continent. However, at this moment, the entire world where Xiaohua was located just happened to turn from one side of the boundless light knot to the other, and the light tide that was rushing up started to fall down like a waterfall on the other side. Just a moment later, another shadow appeared within the light tide. The unconscious figures of Sakura, Yu Mingxin, Yang Haoya, and Huan Wuxin appeared again. At this moment, the demonic horn on Sakura's forehead emitted an extremely dim fluctuation. This fluctuation protected the 3 of them. When the fluctuation dissipated, the 3 of them also crashed into one of the shadows on the continent. Seeing that he had crashed into a continent's light, Xiaohua's heart was suddenly in suspense. And at this time, his eyes swayed. The feeling of dizziness that he hadn't felt for a long time actually appeared. The entire continent was spinning in front of his eyes. Xiaohua was shocked. Because the divine sense mark of the snowy mountain had disappeared, his transfer array didn't have a specific location. If he spun like this, he was afraid that he would fall into the same place as the heavenly prison. At that time, he really wanted to cry but had no tears. Xiaohua hurriedly urged his soul technique. Fortunately, his soul tendrils were like his trembling heart. While protecting Xiaohua, they also extended towards the continent. But after a few breaths, the spinning stopped and all the light disappeared. The familiar transfer array appeared in front of Xiaohua's eyes again. This transfer array was shaking rapidly, as if it was about to collapse. Moreover, in this passage, there were still some faint fragments of time flowing faintly. Good! Seeing the transfer array appear in front of his eyes, Xiaohua understood that he had already come out from the chaotic flow of time. Right now, he was about to land on the snowy mountain. Unfortunately, it was still too early for Xiaohua to be happy. Before he could even clap his hands, a loud rumbling sound resounded by Xiaohua's ears. A teleportation force that could flatten a mountain was similarly transmitted from the teleportation passageway. Not only was the teleportation passageway extremely deflated, even the brilliance of the Grand Universe teleportation token shattered with a PU sound. Not good! Xiaohua hurriedly slapped his head. Boom! A tricolored brilliance spurted out, transforming into a huge lotus that protected his body. At the same time, thousands of soul tendrils flew out from between his eyebrows and landed on the transfer array. One by one, thumb-sized green seal script appeared in the soul tendrils, trying to stabilize the transfer array. Creak, creak, creak! A series of dull sounds came from the left side of Xiaohua. It was as if a tattered wooden door was being blown by the wind and shattered. Puff, 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 puff! The transfer array behind Xiaohua was the same as before, continuously exploding. Xiaohua looked at the torn space and couldn't help but groan. Damn it, I have become enemies with the transfer array. Every time, it seems like I can't teleport to the place normally. Looks like this time, I don't know who will be trampled under my feet again. Can't we use another method to return to the snowy mountain? Although Xiaohua was resentful, he began to try his best to maintain the stability of the transfer array. However, the spatial transformation power in this torrent of time was so strong that it was far from what Xiaohua, a human cultivator, could control. He was like a young boy, using his hand to support a large rock while walking on a rope in the air. On one hand, he had to maintain balance, on the other, he had to use all his strength. Boom! Finally, after persisting for a while, Xiaohua was unable to maintain the transfer array. The green seal script that came in contact with the transfer array shattered one by one, and the soul tendrils connected to the seal script also broke inch by inch. The entire transfer array collapsed with a rumble. Xiaohua hurriedly slapped his forehead when he saw countless gray lightning bolts flashing in the air and glass shards slicing through the space around him. A fist-sized silver-white beam of light shot out of his delusion breaker eye and landed among the shards. Gotcha! Within the pillar of light, all the fragments were shattered, and then a vortex of several meters in size was formed. The entire space was torn apart by this vortex. Before Xiaohua could sweep out with his divine sense, another huge rumble resounded, and a huge pushing force appeared behind him. It was as if the void had kicked him in the butt, and he was forcefully kicked out. This force was so fierce and sudden that Xiaohua only had time to urge his true qi to protect his body. He didn't have time to use the lightning escape technique, and his entire body rushed into the sky. Xiaohua's body abruptly appeared in the sky above the continent. Apart from the ripples in the sky that slowly spread in all directions like water waves, no one knew where he came from, let alone that he had passed through the rare chaotic flow of time between heaven and earth. Perhaps the only thing that could be seen was the tricolored light shining on his body. He was also dragging a tail that looked like thick smoke behind him. He was whistling as he shot toward the mountain peak below at an extremely high speed. Strange whining noises could be heard in the sky as well. Immediately after, with a long "Pu," Xiaohua's body crashed into a mountain peak like a meteor, and disappeared without a trace. This sound was so loud that it scared some of the strange birds nearby, and none of them couldn't help but flap their wings and fly away. The cries of these birds and beasts sounded extremely chaotic under the clear sky. Even though the scorching sun in the sky shone brightly, it still couldn't cover up this mess. At this moment, the nameless continent welcomed an inexplicable uninvited guest. Boom! In just a short moment, the entire mountain peak was shaking. Xiaohua's body flew out from the mountain rocks, and the light protecting his body flickered, blocking all the dust and gravel to the side. Damn it! Xiaohua flew while shouting cheerfully. Snowy Mountain, this daddy is back! Sun Hao, wait for this daddy to flatten your nose! However, when Xiaohua saw the mountain peak in front of him clearly, and then looked at the scene around him, he couldn't help but be stunned on the spot. He saw that this was a mountain peak that was more than 10,000 feet tall, and it was covered with huge mountain rocks. Between the mountain rocks, there were some strange ancient trees. These ancient trees were also huge, and different from what Xiaohua usually saw. They were actually somewhat similar to the ancient trees in the Dragon Island's folded jade legacy realm. Moreover, on the left side of the mountain peak, the mountain range was like a horned dragon crouching on the ground. It stretched as far as the eye could see, and the entire earth was dyed green and yellow by these mountain ranges, brimming with a kind of vicissitudes and desolation. This is the Snowy Mountain? Xiaohua's eyes were filled with doubt, and he muttered to himself. Could it be that this Zhao's previous guess became a reality? Although this Xiao returned to the Western Paradise, but it wasn't the time when this Xiao left, but a long time ago or a long time later? -13. Chapter 4182. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's heart moved, and he hurriedly looked at the sky. It was noon, and a white sun was hanging there. It was not the three suns of the ruins. Fortunately! Seeing this scene, Xiaohua sighed in relief and thought to himself. No matter what, I've returned to the three continents. I've left the ruins and escaped from the great desolate star storm. Who cares what time it is in the 3 continents? As he thought about this, Xiaohua released his divine perception to explore the surroundings again. However, as he looked around, he frowned again. This was because the surroundings of this mountain were completely different from the Great Snow Mountain in his impression. Even the mountain itself was different from the Great Snow Mountain. Even within 10,000 li, there was no mountain similar to the Great Snow Mountain. Perhaps, the world has changed, and the Great Snow Mountain of the past is too far away, and the Great Snow Mountain has not formed yet? Xiaohua comforted himself. Then, Xiaohua urged his body, preparing to teleport to the left to continue exploring. However, just as his body swayed, he stopped again. He looked at the surroundings in disbelief, but he saw that the heaven and earth origin Qi was extremely rich, more abundant than any heavenly abode that Xiaohua had seen before. The heaven and earth origin Qi in many places was about to condense into droplets. It can't be! Xiaohua's heart thumped, and he had a bad feeling. Although the Pure Land is the Buddhist sect's territory, and my Tao sect's cultivators rarely cultivate there, but it's impossible to have such rich heaven and earth origin Qi in the vicinity of the Great Snow Mountain. Even thinking of this, Xiaohua immediately slapped the top of his head, and his innate true Qi turned into 5 Qi's unifications and rushed into the air. Xiaohua's expression changed greatly. Because although there was noble Qi in the heaven and earth origin Qi, this noble Qi was abnormally pure, and there was no Confucian aura at all. It did not even have the kind of mortal aura that Confucian cultivators needed to cultivate. Is this the ancient times? Xiaohua came to a realization, and hurriedly looked around again. Sure enough, the mountain rocks on the mountain peak were huge, and the ancient trees were also huge. Even the grass on the mountain rocks looked similar to Xiaohua's height. It really looked like the great desolate world of the ruins. Xiaohua was completely dumbfounded, and he stood in the air, looking at the great desolate world around him. His lips moved, but in the end, he did not say anything. At this moment, his heart felt empty, like a cloud floating in the sky without anything to rely on. Originally, he had the opportunity to stay in the ruins and even establish a sect in the ruins. However, he didn't stay. He found many excuses for himself in his heart. For example, the cultivators of the ruins cultivated the primordial spirit, while he cultivated the nascent soul. It was not suitable for him to stay in the ruins. However, in reality, the Confucian cultivator Xiaohua cultivated the primordial spirit. Why couldn't Xiaohua cultivate it himself? Moreover, even if Xiaohua cultivates his nascent soul, his scattered soul can also cultivate his primordial spirit. For example, if the ruins were to be destroyed by the prehistoric starstorm, Xiaohua would have no choice but to leave the ruins. However, in reality, since Wu Tian had the confidence to avoid the prehistoric starstorm, why couldn't Xiaohua avoid it? Among all the cultivators in the ruins, Xiaohua was probably the only one who was truly qualified and had the strength to avoid the starburst, right? All excuses were just excuses. They couldn't hide Xiaohua's desire to return to the hidden immortal mainland. This desire was not only for the revival of the Tao sect, not only for Xian, but also for the possibility of meeting Fairy Hongxia again. However, time played a huge joke on Xiaohua. He did find the spiritual wool mark he left behind in the Great Snow Mountain. Moreover, he did try his best to return to the ultimate land of bliss. However, this ultimate land of bliss was not his ultimate land of bliss. It was the ancient ultimate land of bliss. It belonged to the ancient ultimate land of bliss where Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism and demons fought for supremacy. The people he was familiar with, and the things he was familiar with had all become the smoke of the future. Whether it was Fairy Hongxia or Xian, they did not exist in this mainland. The indescribable depression was like a dark cloud that covered Xiaohua's empty heart. However, even if it was a dark cloud, Xiaohua's mind was also slowly floating and rising. At this moment, Xiaohua didn't want to think about anything and didn't want to do anything. It was as if he was extremely tired and wanted to rest. He allowed his mind to float up. The higher he flew, the farther he could see. The ancient desolate land turned into a sand table in Xiaohua's eyes. Although this sand table was boundless, the mountain peak was already like a pellet. Unfortunately, this scene was nothing to the current Xiaohua. He came from the earth, fire, wind and thunder realms and had already seen the ninth heaven. He didn't care about this simple bird's-eye view. The land was far away, so the starry sky was naturally close. Above Xiaohua's mind, in the sky, the sun star and the moon star were hanging opposite each other. Countless bright stars were like eyes, blinking at Xiaohua. The truth of heaven and earth contained in the stars also fell into Xiaohua's mind in the blink of an eye. Seeing this starry sky, Xiaohua of the heavenly Tao immediately trembled. Comprehension poured into Xiaohua's mind like a flood, as if a blocked dam had suddenly been opened. Wang, wang, wang! Xiaohua's mind gradually turned into a jade archive in the sky, allowing thousands of inexplicable fluctuations to fall into it. In the starry sky, all the stars gave birth to halos, and billions of starlight from the other realms fell into jade archive Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua's mind was filled with a kind of perfection similar to a reunion after a long separation. Whether it was Xiaohua's Tao cultivation or Confucian cultivation, all of his divine abilities grew rapidly in this perfection. Perhaps it was an instant, perhaps it was millions of years. Even Xiaohua didn't know when it flew out from the space. That big hand seemed to want to grab the stars in the sky, and directly grab at the starry sky. All of a sudden, Jade Archive Xiaohua's body trembled. All of his astral energy disappeared, and all of his comprehension was annihilated. Even the image of Jade Archive Xiaohua disappeared, leaving only Xiaohua's mind staring at the starry sky in a daze. An uncontrollable ecstasy ignited the hope in his heart. He muttered to himself, "No! This is not the ultimate paradise. The ultimate paradise's starry sky is not like this. This starry sky. I seem to have seen it before. Moreover, this starry sky is engraved with the first stroke of my comprehension of the heavenly Tao. This is perhaps the place I have been bitterly searching for." Xiaohua's mind just had some comprehension, but suddenly, a kind of extreme terror emerged from the bottom of his heart. He couldn't help but look at a certain place in the starry sky. Over there, a strange distortion was slowly taking shape. Not good! Xiaohua's mind was startled, and he immediately fell from the sky into his body. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at the starry sky that was already gone, and he secretly shouted, "Could it be, there is an enemy that can kill this Xiao? Did that enemy just happen to pass by, or did he follow me here? Could it be a demon lord from the demon realm?" Thinking of this, Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent, and he hurriedly invited the green-robed Xiaohua out of the space. Without waiting for the green-robed Xiaohua to see the situation clearly, he immediately asked, "Green-robed fellow Taoist, I want to ask you, can other people use the teleportation array that you and I set up in the ruins?" The green-robed Xiaohua was startled, and then he sensed the panic and doubt in Xiaohua's heart, and he hurriedly replied, "Let me tell you, fellow Taoist, that teleportation array is activated by a soul technique, and it can only be used when combined with the way south opposite north technique, and it doesn't require primordial stones. Therefore, other than fellow Taoist, other people can't use it. Moreover, fellow Taoist, don't forget that there is no teleportation array here that is connected to that teleportation array, so how can other people use it? And if that's the case, I can be at ease." Xiaohua nodded. "In that case, I's warning sign is probably not an enemy chasing after us, but the power of heaven and earth similar to the great desolate star storm. It should be," the green-robed Xiaohua said with a smile. "If this is the great desolate star and not the ancient ultimate paradise, then it means that we are still in the upper realm. With our origins, how can we still have enemies in the upper realm? If the demon Venerable chases after us, it's also possible." Xiaohua still didn't feel at ease and replied, "Big brother, don't be afraid." The devil spirit Xiaohua said, "The demon Venerable won't come out unless there's a great temptation. Everything about Big Brother hasn't been exposed, so the demon Venerable won't have any ideas about Big Brother. Moreover, little brother is currently devouring the devil spirit of the demon array. Previously, when big brother was comprehending, little brother had already devoured more than half of it. After devouring for another 100 years, little brother will also be able to surpass the demon emperor, and at that time, maybe I can also become a demon venerable. 100 years? Xiaohua smiled bitterly. It would be good if it was 100 years. I's warning sign is too powerful, and all the previous warnings can't be compared to it, even the heavenly prison can't be compared to it. Therefore, I'm afraid I can't wait 100 years. Then what should we do? The devil's spirit Xiaohua was somewhat dumbfounded. I is very familiar with the starry sky of this place, and it's different from the Western paradise. Perhaps I also stayed here before I was stranded in the Dawn Rain continent. Xiaohua said in a low voice. It's also because I cultivated here that this place has the divine sense mark that I left behind, so, the divine sense mark that I sensed in the ruins was here, and not the great snow mountain. Even I suspect that the divine sense mark that I sensed in the heavenly prison was also here. Yes, it must be so. The soul cultivator Xiaohua also said. Otherwise, fellow Taoist wouldn't feel that the divine sense mark is somewhat unfamiliar. If that's the case, we can use the soul cultivation technique again to sense the divine sense mark of the Great Snow Mountain, and then teleport back from here. Xiaohua said with slight hesitation. As soon as he said that, the green-robed Xiaohua shook his head slightly again and said, Fellow Taoist, I think you already have some awareness in your heart. Things may not be as simple as you say. From here, or from the ruins, it's not a simple teleportation array that can reach the Western paradise. Alas! Xiaohua sighed and frowned. Fellow Taoist is right. The 3 continents are the lower realm, and the ruins are the upper realm. If there's no accident, this place should be an upper realm similar to the ruins. A simple teleportation array can't break the barrier between the 2 realms and teleport us back. The heavenly prison on the hidden Immortal continent, if I guess correctly, should be a spatial crack in the upper realm. Because this crack belongs to the upper realm, it's filled with time fragments, and no cultivator from the 3 continents can survive inside. -13. Chapter 4183. Are you kidding me? Xiaohua was a little dumbfounded. Looking at the stone giant that was more than 10 zhang tall, he thought to himself. This thing can actually cry. Or perhaps this isn't crying? But if this isn't crying, then what is it? However, looking at the stone giant's slightly trembling shoulders and trembling legs, it didn't seem to be fake. Xiaohua suddenly had a kind of realization. Damn it, although this guy looks huge, could it be that he's still a child? Thinking that he actually bullied a child, Xiaohua couldn't help but feel ashamed. He raised his hand and picked up the stone giant's finger that fell on the stone platform, brought it in front of the stone giant, and lightly poked his arm. That finger wasn't much different from a stone, but there was some warm flow of fire inside. When the finger touched the stone giant's arm, it made a caw-caw sound, exactly like a stone hitting a stone. The stone giant stared blankly, revealing a somewhat red eye from inside his arm. At this moment, the panic in his eyes had already disappeared, replaced by grievance. Moreover, seeing his broken finger, the stone giant once again burst into tears, no different from an injured child. Ai, it really is a child! Xiaohua sighed. He waved his hand, and the broken finger once again poked the stone giant. Only then did the stone giant slightly listen to the crying. He curiously looked at Xiaohua and reached out to take it. Then, the stone giant saw that Xiaohua's expression was very kind and didn't have any evil intentions. Then, he looked at the empty space under Xiaohua's feet. Although there were tears in his eyes, he still opened his mouth, pointed at Xiaohua's feet, and cried. Then, Xiaohua of course didn't understand what he was saying. He only shook his head and said, Little guy, could it be that you don't know how to speak? Then, the stone giant still said the same 2 words. Presumably these 2 words were all he could say. I guess he hasn't grown up yet, so he doesn't know how to speak. Xiaohua bitterly smiled. Not to mention that he doesn't understand what I'm saying. After thinking for a moment, Xiaohua asked again. Little guy, where are you from? I'll bring you back, okay? Then. The stone giant didn't say anything else. Xiaohua was somewhat helpless. He thought for a moment, and took out a few fire attribute top-grade primeval stones from his bosom. However, when he handed them over to the stone giant, Xiaohua was careful and changed these top-grade primeval stones into low-grade primeval stones. Sure enough, when the stone giant saw these yuan stones, he was extremely happy. He hurriedly extended his arm to ask Xiaohua for them. After he placed the yuan stones into his mouth and chewed them with crunching sounds, his large mouth opened and a smile appeared. However, this smile was reflected in the hot magma at the corner of his eyes, making it appear somewhat strange. Then, after the stone giant finished eating the primordial stone, it seemed as if it still wanted more. It raised its hand and asked for more. It was completely like a child who had seen snacks in the secular world. Xiaohua smiled as he shook his head, placing several origin stones into his hand. At this moment, a faint sound came from the distant mountain valley. Although this sound was very soft, it traveled extremely far due to the mountain wind. Hearing this sound, the stone giant's face tensed up and he hurriedly looked up at the sky. At this moment, the sun had already set and the moon had yet to rise. The bright stars in the sky were already hanging in the night sky. Seeing that it was late, the stone giant couldn't help but panic. When he stood up, he hesitated for a moment. The fingers on his left hand were broken and he had just fallen down, so he seemed to have some lingering fear. Moreover, the night was shrouded and the entire mountain peak couldn't be seen clearly. The stone giant didn't dare to rashly go down. Then, the stone giant anxiously opened its mouth and shouted towards the distance. Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry to help. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and raised his head to look at the sky. The stars in the sky were exactly the same as what he saw during the day. However, when he looked at them now, the feeling was completely different. During the day, it was mostly comprehension. During the night, it was mostly warmth and memories. It was a somewhat distant warmth and feelings. In addition, when he saw the childish actions of the stone giant, the weakness in Xiaohua's heart was immediately touched. It was as if the entire starry sky was his home. His unfamiliarity with this continent was instantly reduced by more than half. This place must have a close relationship with this Xiao. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and let the night wind blow his Taoist robe up. He wantonly enjoyed this kind of warmth. He let the gradually rising moonlight sprinkle on his body like water. It was just like that night when it sprinkled on the small house in the mountain village. Then, a hurried call woke Xiaohua up. This voice was filled with anxiety and concern. Xiaohua, who was feeling emotional, immediately heard it. Although it was only 2 words, it was overflowing with affection. Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He seemed to have understood something. Could it be, this stone giant's family can only say 2 words? Then, the small stone giant on the mountainside also replied. The stone giant at the foot of the mountain sped up its then, as if it was scolding. Then, the small stone giant replied a few times, feeling wrong. It sat down again and stuck its head out to look at the darkness at the foot of the mountain. After a long time, a stone giant that was several times larger than the small stone giant carefully climbed from the darkness at the foot of the mountain to the stone wall illuminated by the moonlight. At this moment, the stone giant sped up again and quickly climbed up to the stone platform. Then, the small stone giant had already made way for the stone giant. When it saw the stone giant climb up, it immediately pounced on it. Then, it shouted. The stone giant originally raised its arm as if it wanted to hit the small stone giant. However, when it saw the small stone giant hugging it, it gently lowered its arm and patted the small stone giant's back as if to comfort it. Then, after a while, the stone giant opened its mouth and asked. The small stone giant stuck its head out of the stone giant's chest and pointed at the high mountain cave. It explained again. Then, In the distance, Xiaohua really didn't understand. Why did these two words contain so much information? Then, the stone giant was obviously worried about its child and hid in the cave. When it saw the small stone giant's left hand missing a finger, its expression changed greatly, and it interrupted the small stone giant's words. The small stone giant took out its broken finger and pointed at Xiaohua, who was not far away. It shouted. Then, when the stone giant heard this, it turned pale with fright and hurriedly looked at Xiaohua. Then, without any hesitation, it put the small stone giant behind it and shouted. Then, this time, the stone giant's voice was hurried and carried a hint of threat. Xiaohua immediately understood the meaning of these words. Seeing the fire in the stone giant's eyes, Xiaohua smiled faintly. His figure floated a few feet away and looked at the stone giant indifferently. Then, the small stone giant behind the stone giant said a few words in a low voice. The stone giant also asked a few words. Then, it slowly relaxed its guard. It actually put its palms together and respectfully bowed to Xiaohua to thank him. Seeing the stone giant's very standard Buddhist gesture, Xiaohua was dumbfounded again. He couldn't help but ask, "Sir, on this continent, is there a Buddhist sect?" Then, the stone giant obviously didn't understand what he was saying and still used two words to reply. "Sigh, forget it." Xiaohua was helpless and didn't answer. Then, the small stone giant took out the fire element primordial stone and showed it to the stone giant. The stone giant nodded and looked at Xiaohua. It pointed at the fire element primordial stone and then pointed at itself. Xiaohua understood and took out a few more fire element primordial stones and gave them to the stone giant. However, the stone giant waved its hand, indicating that it didn't want them. Then, the stone giant put the small stone giant on its shoulder and beckoned to Xiaohua. It then slowly descended from the stone platform to the foot of the mountain. Xiaohua didn't think too much. He raised his eyes and looked at the familiar starry sky. His figure followed the stone giant as it descended. He understood that this continent was full of mysteries. This stone giant was probably the key to opening this mysterious door. The stone giant carefully climbed down from the mountain peak and looked at Xiaohua, who was standing in the air behind it. Its big mouth cracked open as if it was smiling. Then, it took a big step forward. Dong, dong, dong! Sounds could be heard from the ground. The stone giant took big strides and ran towards a place in the valley. The small stone giant was lying on the stone giant's back. It seemed that it was overly frightened and had fallen into a deep sleep. Its vertical eyes were tightly shut. The stone giant walked for more than 100 li. However, this distance was nothing in the huge mountain range. It didn't even cross 2 mountain ranges. However, after crossing a broken mountain foothill, the stone giant's figure clearly slowed down. Moreover, the sound of its footsteps also became a lot softer. Under the moonlight, the stone giant's eyes flashed with flames from time to time, as if it was on guard against something. Woo! Just when the stone giant turned its head and wanted to warn Xiaohua, a strange sound suddenly came from a corner of the mountain foothill. Xiaohua raised his head indifferently and saw a strange bird that was dozens of zhang in size. It looked like a huge rock rolling down from the night sky. When it got close to the stone giant, it spread its wings and a sharp claw that was several zhang in size appeared on its abdomen and grabbed towards the stone giant's back. The stone giant was obviously startled. Its one eye that was already on guard immediately opened. A reddish-yellow pillar of fire shot out from its one eye and attacked the strange bird. Pooh! That strange bird was also extremely powerful. Its sharp claw grabbed the air. Without any magic power fluctuation, it directly grabbed the pillar of fire into two. Moreover, when the strange bird flapped its wings, pitch-black water droplets fell from its wings like rain. Pa pa! They fell on the stone giant and the small stone giant. Zzz, zzz. The pitch-black water droplets fell on the two stone giants' bodies and immediately emitted a corrosive sound. It was like cold water falling on hot oil. -13. Chapter 4184. Then, the little stone giant, who was originally sleeping soundly, immediately woke up from the pain and couldn't help but scream loudly. Then, the stone giant hurriedly shouted in a low voice. Then, he suddenly gave up fighting with the strange birds and fled in another direction. On his body and the little stone giant's body, the water droplets splashed by the strange birds corroded thumb-sized deep holes. Sure enough, as soon as the stone giant took off, a dozen strange cries came from the foothills. Caw caw! A flock of strange birds flew out. The largest of these birds were 1,000 feet long, while the smallest was 100 feet long. They flapped their wings and pounced on the stone giant. Even a few strange birds noticed Xiaohua and turned their heads to pounce on him. The stone giant ran for more than 100 steps before he saw a huge rock in front of him. Without any hesitation, he threw the little stone giant into the huge rock and bent down to pick up a huge rock that was more than 100 feet in size. He shouted. Then, he raised his arms, and the huge rock let out a howl and charged toward the strange bird at the front. Puff! The strange bird was caught off guard. It spat out a pitch-black liquid from its mouth and hurriedly flapped its wings to dodge. Sizzle! The liquid in the strange bird's mouth was very corrosive. When it fell on the huge rock, it corroded a big hole in it. However, the huge rock came too fast for the strange bird to dodge. With a loud bang, the huge rock hit the strange bird's head. The strange bird's body was immediately sent flying by the huge rock and fell to the ground with a loud bang. It also let out a mournful cry. While the stone giant was delayed, the dozen strange birds had already flown close. Swish, swish. The dozen pairs of wings flapped and water droplets fell, covering the stone giant. Then, the stone giant shouted and squatted down again. He picked up the huge rocks on the ground and threw them into the sky without looking back. Boom, boom! The huge rocks flew into the sky one after another. Because the stone giant's rocks were aimless, other than the first few that hit the strange birds, the rest were all useless. After the group of strange birds dispersed, they rushed towards the stone giant from all directions. The rain-like water droplets continued to fall from all directions. The stone giant's body emitted sizzling sounds. Xiaohua could clearly see that the stone giant's forehead was dripping with magma-like sweat. Its mouth was also tightly stretched. At that moment, in the distance, the small stone giant had only managed to utter a single word before it stopped. It was as if it had forcefully swallowed it back in. The stone giant was shocked. He raised his head and saw the little stone giant's yellow eyes filled with determination and forbearance. On top of the huge rock, a strange bird was flapping its wings and attacking the little stone giant with water droplets. Then, the stone giant's heart ached. He knew that the little stone giant was injured. He wanted to cry out in pain, but he was afraid that he would be distracted, so he forced himself to endure. The stone giant shouted loudly. He picked up a huge rock in each hand and threw it towards the strange bird that was attacking the little stone giant. At the same time, his single eye that had been holding back suddenly emitted a red light. A pillar of fire shot out from his eye with a loud bang. Caw! Seeing the two huge rocks coming towards it, the strange bird let out a long cry and spread its wings to escape. However, the stone giant's two huge rocks were also ingenious. They didn't directly hit the strange bird's body. Instead, one hit the strange bird's head and the other hit the strange bird's tail. The strange bird couldn't escape forward or backward. The strange bird was stunned for a moment, but it also calmly responded. Its whole body strangely flew horizontally, and the water droplets on its wings took advantage of the momentum to hit the stone giant. However, before the water droplets could land, the stone giant's pillar of fire had already arrived. It landed right in the middle of the two huge rocks, where the body of the bird was sandwiched by the huge rocks. The strange bird was shocked. It tried its best to hit the huge rocks, wanting to escape. However, the stone giant's pillar of fire hit at the perfect time. Sizzle! There was also a chaotic sound. The strange bird's water droplets were extinguished by the pillar of fire. The pillar of fire crazily crashed into the strange bird's body. Not only did it ignite the strange bird's feathers, but it also pierced through the strange bird's body. The strange bird only had time to let out a low cry before its entire body turned into a fireball and fell to the ground. Then, after killing the strange bird, the stone giant didn't dare to be negligent. Its body agilely pounced on the small stone giant. Looking at the strange birds behind the stone giant, they were still orderly before. However, when they saw the stone giant's pillar of fire and the strange bird's fireball hit, they all went crazy. They flapped their wings crazily and pounced on the two stone giants. Woo 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 woo! The stone giant landed beside the small stone giant and hugged it. Immediately after, a yellow halo appeared around its body. Then, as the stone giant fled to the side of the foothill, the 3 fingers on its right arm moved rapidly. Stones that weren't particularly large were driven by the stone giant and flew into the air. The strength of these stones wasn't as great as before, but there were many of them. The stone giant's goal was obviously to disrupt and not kill. Sure enough, the strange birds were very afraid of these stones. They scattered in all directions, giving the stone giant time to escape. However, the stone giant's running speed was far slower than that of the strange birds. In just half the time it took to eat a meal, the stone giant was forced to a stone wall by the strange birds. Seeing dozens of strange birds fiercely pouncing on it, some of them even spitting out pitch-black liquid from their mouths, the stone giant looked up to the sky and shouted. Then, his voice was very miserable. Then, after spitting out another pillar of fire from its eyes, the stone giant turned around and covered the small stone giant under its body, exposing its back to the strange birds. Under the moonlight, the stone giant's back revealed small spots. Boom! The stone giant's pillar of fire shot out and hit a strange bird. At the same time that strange bird turned into a fireball, another loud sound rang out. A curtain of fire that was nearly 100 times larger than the fireball appeared out of thin air. Although it didn't engulf all the strange birds, it still blocked the 2 stone giants behind the curtain of fire. On the other side of the curtain of fire, Xiaohua stood in midair, as if he was thinking about something. Ga. The strange birds seemed unwilling to give up. They all pounced on the curtain of fire. Whether it was their wings or their beaks, they spat out a lot of pitch-black liquid. Some of the larger strange birds even fanned out some wind blades. Unfortunately, how could these strange birds' attacks break through the curtain of fire that Xiaohua casually set up? After a moment, these strange birds saw that their attacks had no effect, so they tactfully flew away. Xiaohua withdrew the curtain of fire and still stood in midair with a smile on his face. His gaze was also gentle as he watched the stone giant use its body to block the small stone giant. It seemed that this side of family made the evil aura that had infected him from the Taoist devil war disappear a lot. Seeing that the strange birds didn't attack, the stone giant also turned its head and looked at the night sky with some astonishment. The small stone giant even peeked out its single eye from the side of the stone giant's body to peek. Seeing that not a single strange bird was left in the night sky, the small stone giant couldn't help but whisper. Then. The stone giant raised its body and proudly patted its chest a few times, as if it was showing off. Then, the stone giant grabbed the small stone giant's body and jumped out of the stone wall, then fled forward. However, after fleeing for another 100 zhang, the stone giant seemed to think of something. It patted its head and turned its head to look for Xiaohua. This old man is here. Xiaohua hurriedly flew over and raised his hand to greet the stone giant. Then, the stone giant patted its chest and pointed at Xiaohua again. Then, it pointed into the distance and beckoned Xiaohua to quickly follow it. Xiaohua faintly smiled, nodded slightly, and followed behind the stone giant. However, after walking for a few li, the stone giant became careful again and lightened its footsteps. Xiaohua frowned and released his divine sense. However, he could only see for a few li. GG. A soft roar like that of a mouse came from not far away. Although the sound was soft, it immediately made the stone giant tremble. Previously it didn't fear the strange birds at all, but now, it was actually standing there and looking pitifully into the distance. In the dark night, a ball of golden brilliance that was only a few feet in size quickly rushed over. Inside the brilliance was a small child wearing armor, and holding a weapon that looked like a spear in his hand. Damn it! A group of demons dancing wildly! Xiaohua glanced around and withdrew his divine sense. He smiled and said, "During the day, I used my divine sense to see tens of thousands of li and didn't see anything. However, at night, everything comes out. Then, the small stone giant also saw the small golden armored person and couldn't help but cry out. Suddenly, it looked at Xiaohua and pointed at him with all its strength, as if it was worried about Xiaohua. Just as Xiaohua was about to speak, a ray of light suddenly appeared in the distant horizon. This ray of light was seven-colored and formed a jade necklace in the night sky. Under the seven-colored light, even the moonlight high up in the sky lost its splendor. What was special was that after the ray of light, several roars came from all over the continent. Waves of desolate power surged out in all directions like a surging tide. Within this power, there was a vague shadow that crossed the restless night and flew towards the ray of light. This desolate power was so ferocious that although it rushed to where Xiaohua was, whether it was the small golden armored person or the stone giant, they both prostrated themselves on the ground and trembled in fear. Oh? A desolate powerhouse? Facing this nameless power, Xiaohua was also shocked. While urging his secret technique to resist, he narrowed his eyes and looked at the ray of light. He didn't dare to rashly release his divine sense and thought to himself, "What is this ray of light?" However, in just a few breaths, the ray of light immediately fell and disappeared without a trace. Only the nameless power annihilated Xiaohua's surroundings. Xiaohua's figure flickered and instantly disappeared. However, after a while, Xiaohua reappeared not far away. He looked at the two stone giants lying on the ground and then looked at the small golden armored person not far away. After thinking for a while, he called out Dragon Vein Xiaohua and Phoenix Body Xiaohua and said with a smile, "I still have some things to do. I'll have to trouble you two fellow Taoists." -13. Chapter 4185. Fellow Taoist, you're really interesting, the Dragon Vein Xiaohua said with a smile. That place is obviously a secret treasure, and it might even contain the secrets of this continent. Fellow Taoist, you didn't personally explore it, but instead stayed here to protect two stone giants that you don't know. Fellow Taoist's actions really make I puzzled. Phoenix Body Xiaohua was also puzzled. Fellow Taoist, even if you want to protect two stones that aren't human, you only need to throw the golden armored little person far away. Why do you have to stay here? Xiaohua's originally curved phoenix eyes were now curved like crescent moons. He said with a smile. Although you two have already become independent adults, you still don't have the emotions of a true cultivator. The affection of these stone giants is really touching. If I don't send these two stone giants back to their home, I won't be able to rest assured. Moreover, to tell you the truth, I have a feeling that the karma of these two stone giants is more important than the secret treasure in the distance. Dragon Vein Xiaohua and Phoenix Body Xiaohua naturally didn't have Xiaohua's karma. They both smiled at each other and flew towards the place where the multicolored light disappeared. Xiaohua was still standing in the air, quietly waiting. After the time it took to eat a meal, the aura that suppressed everything gradually disappeared. The golden-armored little person was the first to get up from the ground. However, when the little person looked at the two stone giants on the ground, he didn't have any thoughts of attacking. He shrunk his neck and looked around, then turned around and ran away. Then, the golden-armored little person left. Only then did the stone giant straighten up. He awkwardly got up and ran in another direction. Only after running for a while did he remember Xiaohua. He turned his head again and waved at Xiaohua. Perhaps because of the change just now, they didn't encounter any special beasts in the next few mountain ridges. Looking at the vermilion mountain ridges in front of him, and the hot air in front of him, Xiaohua understood that this was probably the stone giant's home. Previously, When Xiaohua looked down from high up in the sky, he didn't feel that it was too far away. However, when he really ran all the way with the stone giant, he realized the true distance. Then, Xiaohua turned his head to look. Sure enough, the mountain peak that he had fallen from earlier just happened to be exposed in the distant mountain ridge. He reckoned that the little stone giant had seen something strange nearby and ran so far away alone to look for something. Then, the stone giant led Xiaohua into the mountain ridge and circled around to the side of a huge boulder. He pointed at the boulder and pointed at it a few times before turning around and leaving. When Xiaohua heard the stone giant say so many, then, he finally understood the meaning of these two words. He smiled and calmly stood there. Xiaohua released his divine sense and watched as the stone giant tiptoed around a few times, crossing over a dozen large stones. It even turned around to check if Xiaohua was following. Xiaohua couldn't help but laugh in his heart. Because right in front of the stone giant's head, there was a large amount of magma exposed on the ground. If Xiaohua didn't know that the stone giant had magma inside its body, then it would be fine. But since he knew, how could he not know that the stone giant's cave was inside the magma? Sure enough, when the stone giant walked to the magma, the little stone giant jumped down from his body and happily jumped into the magma. The stone giant also walked to the magma and slowly submerged his body in the magma. When the stone giant's figure disappeared, Xiaohua's divine sense swept over the magma and then withdrew it. Xiaohua had also seen the magma before, but he didn't look into its depths. Naturally, he didn't know that there was a world inside the magma. After the time it took to eat a meal, the stone giant came out of the magma. Large drops of magma flowed on the surface of his body. The marks left by the strange bird's attack had already gradually disappeared. The stone giant walked out and arrived in front of Xiaohua. He stretched out his hand, and in his hand were several mid-grade fire attribute primordial stones. Then, the stone giant placed the fire attribute primordial stones in front of Xiaohua and shouted. His body was still emitting flames. Looking at the fire attribute primordial stones, Xiaohua suddenly realized that the stone giant had brought him here to repay his kindness of saving the little stone giant. He was giving him the primordial stones. Xiaohua smiled and slightly waved his hand. He pushed the fire attribute primordial stones to the stone giant, indicating that he didn't want them. Then, the stone giant was somewhat puzzled. He scratched his head and pushed the primordial stones in front of Xiaohua again. Xiaohua thought for a moment and took out a few top-grade primordial stones from his bosom. He spread them on his palm and showed them to the stone giant. Then, the stone giant saw the top-grade primordial stones in Xiaohua's hand and immediately exclaimed. He stretched out his hand to grab the primordial stones, but his hand stopped in front of the primordial stones. Even the magma on his arm dripped onto Xiaohua's hand. The stone giant obviously didn't notice that the magma on Xiaohua's hand didn't cause any movement. He hurriedly waved his hand and pointed at the boulder where Xiaohua was. Then, he said a few more times and hurriedly turned around. Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. He looked at the fire attribute primordial stones in his hand and rubbed his chin as he looked at the magma flowing from the stone giant's body. He seemed to be lost in thought. Not long after, another stone giant that was 3 times bigger than the previous one quickly ran over. The previous stone giant followed behind this stone giant. When this stone giant saw Xiaohua, he immediately shouted, "So dense, so dense!" He also put his palms together and saluted. It seems that he said one more word than the previous stone giant." Xiaohua laughed in his heart. He also put his palms together and saluted back. He didn't say anything. After a very strange salute, the stone giant stretched out a finger that was comparable to a tree and pointed at Xiaohua's hand. He asked, "So dense, so dense?" Xiaohua was already calm and unafraid of the other side's all-encompassing, "So dense, let alone this so dense, that was one more word then, so dense." Xiaohua understood and waved his hand. Several top-grade primordial stones fell into the stone giant's hand. The stone giant took the top-grade primordial stones and placed them in his hand. A faint flame was emitted from his single eye. The flame illuminated the night sky and caused the top-grade primordial stones to flash with flames. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the stone giant finished looking at the top-grade primordial stones one by one. He then carefully returned the primordial stones to Xiaohua. Xiaohua's impression of these stone giants immediately increased. He waved his hand, indicating that he didn't want the primordial stones and gave them to the stone giant. Unexpectedly, the stone giant shook his head and put the top-grade primordial stones in front of Xiaohua. He put his palms together again and respectfully prostrated himself on the ground. He then put his palm in front of Xiaohua and said, "So dense, so dense." Behind the stone giant, the previous stone giant also prostrated himself on the ground. It didn't seem like he was prostrating, but rather a welcoming ceremony. Xiaohua naturally wasn't afraid that there was something fishy. He almost didn't think about it, and floated onto the stone giant's palm. "So dense, so dense." The stone giant was very happy. He carefully lifted Xiaohua in front of his chest and brought the previous stone giant back to the magma. When the stone giant walked in front of the magma, a scarlet halo appeared around his body. This halo came out from his palm and protected Xiaohua. The magma emitted gurgling bubbles, just like what Xiaohua saw in the flame forest swamp of the Xiaoyu continent. The stone giant's feet and body were steady, as if there were stairs in the magma. After walking for a while, the two stone giants turned around and continued to walk up. When the two finally walked out of the magma, Xiaohua was actually in a space that was several hundred li in size. Xiaohua's divine sense swept out and immediately saw clearly that most of the space was filled with magma. Aside from some small island-like protruding rocks within the magma, there were only some vermilion red rocks at the edges of the magma. These rocks were similarly burning with thin flames, roasting the space to an extreme degree. The stone giant respectfully placed Xiaohua on the burning rocks, as if the flames on the rocks were ordinary grass. He didn't even think about whether Xiaohua could withstand it. Xiaohua naturally wasn't afraid of these flames and high temperature. He stepped on the magma. "So secret, so secret." As the stone giant spoke, he respectfully clasped his hands together and bowed. Then, he turned around and walked into the ocean-like magma. In just a moment, his figure disappeared. Xiaohua wanted to use his divine sense to chase after him, but he was a gentleman. Now that he was invited here, he naturally wouldn't look into other people's secrets. Therefore, he opened his mouth and wanted to say something to the stone giant. However, after opening his mouth, he swallowed his words back down. Xiaohua really couldn't stand the stone giant's omnipotent, so. At this moment, a hoarse and weak voice came from the magma lake in the distance. A stone giant floated over from the magma. When it rushed to the top of the rock, it looked like a dying person lying there. The stone giant beside Xiaohua looked at the stone giant in the distance, and then looked at Xiaohua. He took out the primeval stones he wanted to give Xiaohua and pointed at the stone giant in the distance. He asked, So? Xiaohua was quite puzzled. He was confused, but he still nodded. The stone giant was very happy and rushed towards the stone giant's location. Xiaohua's heart was moved, and his figure fluttered as he followed the stone giant. The stone giant came to the side of the stone giant, and put several primeval stones into the stone giant's mouth. Crunch, crunch! The stone giant greedily chewed the primeval stones, just like a mortal who saw food. After a while, a scarlet halo appeared around the stone giant's body. Then, the stone giant was brimming with energy. He raised his hand and hammered the shoulder of the stone giant beside Xiaohua a few times. He seemed to be calling out gratefully. Then, so. The stone giant smiled and replied. It also hammered the shoulder of the stone giant. Looking at the stone giant that ate the primeval stones and then entered the magma lake, Xiaohua somewhat understood. The fire primeval stones should be the stone giant's food. The stone giant just now was probably hungry. -13. Chapter 4186. Then. The stone giant raised his hands as if he wanted to explain something to Xiaohua. The tone of his mouth was very apologetic. He should be apologizing for giving the primordial stones that were originally meant for Xiaohua to another stone giant. Hee. Xiaohua laughed. He didn't dare to ask whether the stone giant understood him or not. He laughed and said, "Saving your son was as easy as lifting a finger. In addition, it was me who scared him into falling. It doesn't matter if you give me the primordial stones or not." Then. Of course, the stone giant didn't understand what Xiaohua was saying. However, he still laughed happily. His big mouth split open to both sides of his head. The stone giant accompanied Xiaohua at the side of the magma. After half a meal's time, he didn't see the stone giant come back. Xiaohua took a breath of extremely pure fire attributed primordial energy of heaven and earth. He felt very comfortable. No matter where in this world, it was the dream of cultivators to cultivate. It was no wonder that there were so many almighty people in the ancient times. Then, another voice sounded. The little stone giant that Xiaohua saved also walked out of the magma. Looking at Xiaohua beside the stone giant, he timidly walked over and whispered. The stone giant slightly shook his head. He said with difficulty, Then he pointed at the magma, hinting the little stone giant to go back. The little stone giant pitifully walked 2 steps. He turned his head again and looked at the stone giant, unwilling to move. Then, the stone giant seemed to be angry. He raised his hand and clenched 3 fingers together to threaten the little stone giant. The little stone giant was helpless. He could only walk back to the magma. However, after he entered the magma, he turned his head and looked at Xiaohua. Xiaohua's heart moved. He quickly raised his hand and took out a low-grade primordial stone. He said with a smile, "Little guy, do you want this thing?" Then, the little stone giant immediately cheered. He jumped out of the magma and quickly rushed in front of Xiaohua. He snatched the low-grade primordial stone and stuffed it into his mouth. The stone giant beside Xiaohua seemed to be a little embarrassed. He lowered his head and didn't express his intention. Xiaohua was a little confused. This place had such pure primordial energy of heaven and earth, and so much magma. How could there be no fire-attributed primordial stones? However, when he released his divine sense slightly, he came to a realization. This was because there were many rock giants swimming and lying in the lava within a few miles of the area. Although Xiaohua didn't look into the distance, he absolutely believed that within these several hundred miles of magma, there were definitely even more stone giants. If they ate fire attribute source stones as food, then no matter how many source stones were condensed within the magma, it wouldn't be enough for them to eat. Moreover, looking at the little stone giant that had recovered its vigor and vitality, Xiaohua understood even more clearly that this little fellow had probably seen him coming from beyond the heavens and thought that there would be some kind of opportunity. That was why it had run so far and passed by so many territories occupied by its natural enemies to look for delicious food. As for the stone giant, in order to thank Xiaohua, it also gave him the few source stones it had. In Xiaohua's eyes, source stones were source stones, but in the stone giant's eyes, they were the most precious thing. It was his life. Xiaohua was a compassionate person. The actions of the 2 stone giants had moved him even more. He had the heart to help these stone giants. However, the stone giants weren't humans. Although there were source stones in Xiaohua's space, these source stones weren't of good quality. No matter how much Xiaohua gave them, they would eventually be used up. What Xiaohua wanted to do was to find a way to solve this problem once and for all. Just as Xiaohua was pondering, a burst of sound came from the magma. This sound fell into Xiaohua's ears like thunder, causing him to be dumbfounded. Xiaohua looked at the magma lake in disbelief. He saw the magma lake, which was thousands of feet deep, began to violently stir. Bubbles of several zhang in size emerged from the magma lake. Along with these bubbles, there was the sound of a wooden fish being struck. In front of Xiaohua's dumbfounded eyes, a 1,000-foot-tall stone giant walked out of the lava lake. This stone giant's face was full of wrinkles, just like layers upon layers of rock. Behind this stone giant were several smaller stone giants, each of them holding a stone wooden fish. These stone wooden fish were probably the largest wooden fish Xiao Hua had ever seen. Each of these stone wooden fish was dozens of feet long, and each of the stone giants held stone rods that were dozens of feet long. As they struck these stone wooden fish, a crisp sound rang out. The last stone giant to appear from the magma lake was the stone giant who had previously entered the magma lake to report. At this time, the stone giant stepped on the waves and respectfully clasped his hands together and said, "So dense, so dense." Xiao Hua knew that the origin of this seemingly old stone giant was extraordinary. He also urged his body to step on the magma lake and meet the stone giant. Seeing that there was nothing wrong with Xiao Hua's body stepping on the magma lake, the old stone giant's eyes were filled with astonishment. Only when Xiao Hua flew closer did the stone giant wake up. He clasped his hands together and said, "Namo Maitreya Buddha!" Xiao Hua was already surprised when the old stone giant called out the name of Buddha, but this name of Buddha was actually Namo Maitreya Buddha, which shocked Xiao Hua even more. Xiao Hua was stunned for a moment, then he came back to his senses. He bowed and said, "Namo Maitreya Buddha! Namo Maitreya Buddha! Namo Maitreya Buddha!" When the old stone giant heard Xiao Hua's words, he was also happy. However, his eyes flashed with doubt as he asked, "Ah?" Xiao Hua saw the confusion in the old stone giant's eyes, and he himself was even more puzzled. However, in just a few breaths of time, Xiao Hua's head turned rapidly, and his face showed a strange expression. It seemed like he was smiling but not smiling, or he couldn't help laughing. After hearing the old stone giant's name of Namo Maitreya Buddha, Xiao Hua finally understood that that the big stone giant and the small stone giant spoke of was not so, but Namo. And the so dense that the stone giant spoke of was not so dense, but Namo Maitreya. Perhaps these three stone giants didn't know how to speak, and only learned these three words. Although Xiao Hua understood the secret, in the face of the all-encompassing Namo Maitreya Buddha, Xiao Hua still didn't know how to answer. However, he only hesitated for a few breaths of time, then he raised his hand and waved. The sound of falling rain could be seen in the air. Tens of thousands of fire element primordial stones appeared out of thin air and fell into the magma lake. Under the old stone giant's dumbstruck expression, a layer of primordial stones covered the magma lake, shining with a gorgeous luster. In an instant, the sound of the wooden fish suddenly stopped. The dozen stone giants holding the wooden fish couldn't help but say in unison, "Namo Maitreya Buddha, Namo Maitreya Buddha." Phew! The old stone giant breathed a long sigh of relief. He withdrew his shocked gaze and put his palms together. "Namo Maitreya Buddha! Namo Maitreya Buddha!" Xiao Hua smiled and said, "I don't know why you're chanting Namo Maitreya Buddha, but since you're a disciple of Buddhism, I can't treat you poorly. These origin stones can be considered as a gift from me, please accept them." As he spoke, he used his hand to draw in the air and sent it to the old stone giant, indicating that all the primordial stones were given to him. "Namo Maitreya Buddha!" The old stone giant naturally understood. His wrinkled face was filled with joy. He waved his hand and said again. Many stone giants walked forward and waved their hands, controlling the magma lake to collect the primordial stones. Then, the old stone giant respectfully pointed at the magma lake under his feet and said, "Namo Maitreya Buddha?" "Good!" Xiao Hua knew that the old stone giant was inviting him to go deeper into the magma lake. He nodded and smiled in agreement. However, when the old stone giant was about to kneel on the magma lake and put his palms together, Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand and helped the old stone giant up. He pointed at his nose and then at the magma lake, indicating that he could go down. However, Xiao Hua's gesture was obviously not understood by the old stone giant. Therefore, Xiao Hua simply used an escape technique and entered the magma lake. Seeing that Xiao Hua could freely enter and exit the magma lake, the old stone giant's eyes almost fell out. The respect in his eyes was now mixed with a trace of fear. "Please!" Xiao Hua raised his hand and gestured. The old stone giant hurriedly nodded and called out, "Namo Maitreya Buddha," as his figure disappeared into the magma lake. Xiao Hua followed the old stone giant into the magma lake and went deeper into the magma lake. Just as Xiaohua had seen with his divine sense, there were many stone giants in the magma lake. Some stone giants were leisurely walking in the magma lake. When they saw the old stone giant, they respectfully saluted him. Some stone giants had their eyes tightly closed, as if they were sleeping in the magma lake. Even more stone giants were moving up and down the magma lake, looking very busy as if they were looking for something. After traveling for half the time it took to eat a meal, the entire bottom of the magma lake began to slowly shrink. In the end, it shrank into an oval-shaped hole that was more than 10 li in size. Below the hole, there was more magma flowing, and it was even more scorching. Obviously, this was the core of the magma lake. Near the oval-shaped hole, there were many stone giants, but now there were few people. It seemed that even the stone giants didn't dare to get too close to the core of the magma lake. The surroundings of the cave were similarly filled with large and small ochre-red boulders. These boulders were of different shapes and looked very strange. However, the strangest thing was not these boulders, but the Buddhist shrine at the highest point of the boulder. This Buddhist shrine was neither big nor small, but when the old stone giant walked to the front of the Buddhist shrine, Xiaohua understood that this Buddhist shrine was not even as tall as the old stone giant's knees. When the old stone giant landed in front of the Buddhist shrine, he respectfully prostrated himself on the ground, saluting according to Buddhist etiquette. His figure in front of the Buddhist shrine was especially huge, and his piety made Xiaohua sigh. However, when Xiaohua's gaze passed the old stone giant's figure and landed on the Buddhist statue in the Buddhist shrine, he was stunned again. How? How could it be him? Xiaohua's heart almost jumped out of his chest. He looked at the Buddhist shrine in disbelief and couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice, Namo Maitreya Buddha is actually Luer? -13. Chapter 4187. That's right, in that crude, stone-built Buddhist shrine, there was a fiery red Buddha statue carved out of crystal, flashing with holy Buddha light. The Buddha light shone brightly on the face of the Buddha statue. Wasn't that the lifelike Jiang Luer? Xiaohua had once stopped Jiang Luer, whose Buddhist name was Chuanzang, from taking down the Buddhist edict in the Jiangqiao temple. He had a deep impression of Jiang Luer's shaved head. Now that he saw the Buddha statue, he naturally thought of Jiang Luer. How is this possible? After Xiaohua recovered from his shock, he muttered, What's going on? How can Jiang Luer be Nanhua Maitreya Buddha? How can his Buddha statue be in this mysterious primitive continent? Xiaohua's suspicions were heavy, but looking at the old stone giant who had already stood up, Xiaohua knew that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of this old stone giant. Xiaohua thought for a moment, and waved his hand, releasing Buddha Bodhi from his Naiwen palace. Buddha Bodhi looked around in bewilderment, activating the Buddha light to block the magma outside his body. He cupped his hands and asked, Nanhua Maitreya Buddha, why didn't you ask this poor monk to come out? Xiaohua didn't explain much. He pointed at the shrine behind Buddha Bodhi and said weakly, What's the matter? See for yourself. Why ask so much? Oh? Buddha Bodhi was even more puzzled, but when he saw the Buddha statue in the shrine, Buddha Bodhi smiled bitterly and replied, Tan Yu, what else do you want this poor monk to say? Jiang Luer is the real reincarnation of Nanhua Maitreya Buddha, this poor monk is the fake. Or it could be said that this poor monk stole Jiang Luer's luck and practiced the exquisite Lotus Leaf Sutra first. Xiaohua sucked in a breath of cold air. The thoughts in his mind instantly became clear. That's right. This Xiao lost his memory and wandered to the Dawn Rain continent. By a freak combination of factors, this Xiao obtained the exquisite Lotus Leaf Pagoda. In fact, this Xiao is the intruder of the Dawn Rain continent. If this Xiao didn't lose his memory, this exquisite Lotus Leaf Pagoda would have fallen into his hands after Jiang Luer was born. Then he, a cultivator who couldn't practice Taoist techniques, would start practicing the real Buddhist techniques. After all, he is the real reincarnation of Maitreya Buddha. Furthermore, if Tan Yu hadn't come to the Dawn Rain continent, Jiang Luer would still be on the Dawn Rain continent. Although he wouldn't be able to obtain the gold leaf from the Great Snow Mountain, he would still be able to cultivate the exquisite Leaf Sutra, and not the current Prajna Heart Sutra. Buddha Subhuti reminded. You wouldn't have come to this fork in the road, and there wouldn't have been any sutra seeking bliss. However, Xiaohua was even more puzzled. He asked, if Jiang Lu is Namo Maitreya Buddha, then whose Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra is? Back on the Great Snow Mountain, didn't that old monk also say? See. At this point, Xiaohua once again sucked in a breath of cold air, because everything that the old monk had said to him that day was equally suitable for Jiang Luer. Jiang Luer also understood the language of the Dawn Rain continent. Could it be that the old monk of the Great Snow Mountain is waiting for Jiang Luer? It's not me? Xiaohua has a strange feeling. But if the old monk wasn't waiting for this Xiao, then the old monk shouldn't have died that day. He should still have a longer lifespan. Thinking of this, Xiaohua seems to have thought of something. He hurriedly waved his hand and took out the pills he had obtained from the kitchen of the Great Snow Mountain. A silver-white halo flashed across his eyes. After looking at it for a moment, he said somewhat dejectedly, Not bad. This is a spirit medicine that can extend one's lifespan. One pill can extend one's lifespan by 10 years, or even more. That old monk still had a lot of it in his kitchen. He should still be alive. He mistook me for this Xiao and stopped taking it. It can be said that he was burned alive. Namo Maitreya Buddha. Buddha Subhuti sighed and said again, if this Buddha fruit belonged to someone else, it would still be snatched. But this Buddha fruit belongs to Luer. How can we snatch it? Yes, that's right. Xiaohua nodded. Luer's sutra-seeking bliss is most likely an arrangement of the Buddhist sect to let him attain the Buddha fruit of Namo Maitreya Buddha. When we return to the hidden immortal continent, we will settle this matter. There's another question. Buddha Subhuti said again. If we snatch Luer's Buddha fruit and fate, then whose did Luer snatch? That Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra, from the records of the Buddhist sect, it should be a cultivation technique cultivated by Ananda. Where is Ananda now? What is the Buddha fruit that Jiang Luer attained? It's a mess. Xiaohua rubbed his temples in distress and said with a bitter smile, Didn't your Buddhist sect cultivate the golden body of 9 lives and control reincarnation? How did such a big accident happen today? Haven't you heard of that saying? Things that can go wrong will definitely go wrong. Or is it that things that you worry about going wrong will definitely go wrong? Buddha Subhuti answered with a smile. Although my Buddhist sex Arhat cultivates the golden body of reincarnation, it's inevitable that there will be accidents in the process. This accident is another person's opportunity and also his own tribulation. Today's situation is Jiang Luer's tribulation and this poor monk's opportunity. That's true. Xiaohua nodded. If nothing goes wrong, all the Buddha fruits have already been attained by the Buddha Lord and the Bodhisattvas. How can they be left for the younger generation? At this point, Xiaohua seemed to think of something and said to Buddha Subhuti apologetically, Fellow Immortal, although this is our opportunity, but it's also Luer's tribulation. We are Luer's elders and senior sister is also very good to me, haha. Buddha Subhuti waved his hand and said, Namo Maitreya. You're thinking too much. Although this poor monk is an outsider, this poor monk and Sandalwood are one. Didn't Sandalwood say earlier? We are born from the same root, and definitely can't cause trouble. This poor monk deeply agrees. Luer is Sandalwood's nephew and also this poor monk's nephew. It doesn't matter if this poor monk doesn't attain the Buddha fruit or not. The key is the kinship that Sandalwood mentioned. Although this poor monk doesn't understand this kinship too well, this poor monk knows that this is the most important thing in this world to Sandalwood. This poor monk can give up the Buddha fruit for this so-called kinship. At this point, Buddha Subhuti changed the topic and said with a smile, Moreover, Sandalwood, don't forget that this poor monk still has the Buddha fruit of Namo Great Compassion Great Guanyin Bodhisattva to attain. Good. Xiaohua listened and said with a smile, If fellow Immortal has such a mind, there's hope for attaining the Buddha fruit in this life. Namo Maitreya. Buddha Subhuti put his palms together and chanted Buddha's name without saying anything else. When Xiaohua and Buddha Subhuti were talking, the old stone giant didn't pay attention. First, Xiaohua and Buddha Subhuti rarely spoke. Most of the time, it was a mental communication. Other people simply couldn't hear anything. Second, even if the old stone giant could hear, he simply couldn't understand what Xiaohua was saying. After the old stone giant respectfully saluted, he got up and wanted to say something to Xiaohua. However, when his single eye looked past Xiaohua and landed on Buddha Subhuti's body, extreme shock appeared in his single eye. He opened his mouth and said, "Namo Maitreya, Namo Maitreya." One after another, he was stunned for half a cup of tea's time. Plop! The old stone giant suddenly knelt in front of Buddha Subhuti. Magma flowed out of his single eye and his mouth was sobbing. However, he still chanted the same 6 words. Buddha Bodhi sighed and lifted the old stone giant up. With a benevolent look in his eyes, he said, "Namo Maitreya Buddha, I'm not the Maitreya Buddha that you guys worship. I'm just an ordinary Bodhisattva. Namo Maitreya." The old stone giant didn't care about what Buddha Subhuti said. He just used his big hand to carefully pull Buddha Subhuti's monk robe and chanted Buddha's name again and again. Although his pronunciation wasn't accurate, his incomparable devotion actually made Buddha Subhuti feel a trace of the power of faith. How is this possible? Buddha Subhuti was somewhat astonished. He looked at Xiaohua in puzzlement. After all, he wasn't Jianluer, nor was he Maitreya. How could he obtain the old stone giant's faith? However, although the power of faith was particularly weak, it was real. Buddha Subhuti rarely obtained any faith in the past tens of thousands of years. Therefore, he could clearly perceive the appearance of the power of faith. Xiaohua looked at the old stone giant's appearance, and then looked at Buddha Subhuti's puzzlement. He also frowned. Normally, he would definitely encourage Buddha Subhuti to help. However, if Buddha Subhuti were to help now, it would clearly be snatching the opportunity from Jianluer. Not only was Buddha Subhuti hesitating, he was also hesitating. "Fellow Immortal." Xiaohua's heart moved and he said, "Previously, the human race on Shenhua continent was not prosperous. Fellow Taoist in green robes controlled the entire fortune gate by himself. Even fellow Taoist in Confucianism couldn't spread his branches and leaves. Now, the human race on this continent is flourishing. I'm afraid that there are more than 100 million of them. These humans also have the power of faith. Fellow Immortal, you can spread the essence of Buddhism on Shenhua continent." "Haha, Tanyu, I'm afraid that even a wise man will make a mistake." Buddha Subhuti laughed. "The human race on Shenhua continent is flourishing. They can cultivate Taoism, Confucianism, and even soul cultivators can preach. This poor monk won't compete with them. This poor monk has a better place." "Oh? What else is there?" Xiaohua was slightly taken aback. However, it was only a moment before Xiaohua came to a sudden realization. Soon after, he bowed respectfully and said, "Namo Maitreya Buddha, since fellow Immortal has such a great wish, this poor Taoist will address you as master in the future." "I don't dare," Buddha Subhuti said compassionately. "Humans are fruits, devils are fruits, beasts are fruits, and demons are also fruits. Everything in this world is a fruit in the eyes of my Buddhism sect. Tanyu has taken in so many devils, but you still haven't found a way to deal with them. Leave these devils to this poor monk. This poor monk doesn't have to compete with you fellow Immortals for anything. Master is merciful." Hearing Buddha Subhuti's great wish, Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He called him Master and said, "I didn't think things through that day and brought great trouble to Master. Namo Maitreya Buddha, this is tribulation, fate, cause, and effect." Buddha Subhuti nodded slightly. He then looked at the old stone giant who was carefully looking at him. The lava in the stone giant's eye had already flowed to his chest. -13. Chapter 4188. Buddha Bodhi pondered for a moment, and continued. "Although this poor monk is not Jianluer, this poor monk is Namo Maitreya in front of the old stone giant. In his eyes there is no difference between a Bodhisattva and a Buddha Lord. Just like Tanyu in the hidden immortal continent, although Tanyu used the name of compassionate travel and the image of compassionate bodhisattva, the strength of faith is gathered on Namo Maitreya merciful bodhisattva. Even if this poor monk does good deeds now, the strength of faith will fall on Namo Maitreya Buddha. When you and I return to the hidden immortal continent, this poor monk will give up this good karma and give it to Jianluer. Won't this karma end? It seems to be different. Xiaohua shook his head slightly, disagreeing. As for why, he himself was not clear. Buddha Bodhi looked at the old stone giant, and then raised his head to look at the magma. As if he was aware of the movement here, he slowly turned to the stone giants gathered here and said only one sentence. If the Buddha fruit is this poor monk's, other bodhisattvas will want to help these devout believers, even if they get this merit. Then this poor monk will absolutely not resent them, and also absolutely do not want this merit. This poor monk would rather these devout believers keep their faith in my Buddhist kingdom. If you think it's right, then do it. Xiaohua already understood what Buddha Bodhi wanted to do. He nodded. That Jianluer who took down the Buddha list and embarked on the path of sutra seeking in nirvana is definitely not that kind of petty bodhisattva. Namo Maitreya Buddha! Bodhi Buddha chanted the name of Buddha and pointed at the old stone giant's forehead with his slender finger, saying, With my life, I call upon the supreme mercy of Buddha, dispel the ignorance of the world, wash away the stubbornness of the mortal world, gain the wisdom of 100 monks, and open the true words of the light of Buddha. Namo Maitreya Buddha, Namo Maitreya Buddha. As Buddha Bodhi's finger fell, numerous phantoms appeared in the magma nearby. Tens of thousands of Buddhas appeared in the phantoms, and chants of Buddha came from the small worlds. When Buddha Bodhi's finger touched the stone giant's forehead, a cluster of spirit light appeared from the stone giant's forehead. It was so simple yet so bright. Even someone as strong as Xiaohua felt his vision blur. Countless images appeared and instantly disappeared in the spirit light. Tens of thousands of scriptures appeared and instantly disappeared in the spirit light. Crack! At this moment, in the shrine not far away, the forehead of the Namo Maitreya Buddha carved with crimson crystal split open, and a scar visible to the naked eye divided Jianluer's face into two halves. Xiaohua was shocked and unconsciously said, Good, good! In a moment, the spirit light converged on the stone giant's forehead, and a trace of clarity flashed in the stone giant's eyes. Buddha Bodhi withdrew his flower-pinching finger, and the light of Buddha around him dimmed a little. His face was neither happy nor sad as he said, Old man, do you understand? Namo Maitreya Buddha! The old stone giant's face was filled with surprise, and he immediately responded. However, that was all, and he didn't say anything else. Xiaohua was taken aback. He was quite puzzled in his heart because the Buddhist Dharma was boundless. Most of the time, the Buddhist Dharma that Buddha Subhuti knew was even more powerful than his own Tao Dharma. Since Buddha Subhuti was using this Buddhist Dharma at this moment, then he must be confident. Buddha Bodhi wasn't surprised. He just closed his eyes for a moment, and then he opened them and said with a smile, Old man, you should be able to understand this poor monk's words, but you can't say it because you don't know how to say it, and you don't know how to write it. Namo Maitreya Buddha! The old stone giant nodded and put his palms together. Good! Buddha Bodhi nodded slightly and said again, Old man, if you think this Dharma is useful, you can bring your people here, and this Dharma is willing to use it on them one by one. What do you think? Master, are you crazy? Without waiting for the old stone giant to speak, Xiaohua anxiously pointed at the Buddha statue in the shrine and whispered, This Dharma can only be used by a Buddha Lord who has Buddha fruit. It's fine if Master uses the power of faith of Buddha Maitreya to use it once, but if you use it one by one, the consequences will be unimaginable. Namo Maitreya Buddha! If I don't go to hell, who will? Buddha Bodhi glanced at the Buddha statue and said, This Dharma will only use this Dharma. This Dharma will bear all the consequences, and I'm willing to give all the merit to Namo Maitreya Buddha. Namo Maitreya Buddha! At this moment, the old stone giant replied and respectfully invited Buddha Bodhi to take a seat. He walked into the magma and patted the magma with his hand. He chanted Buddha's name again, and the stone giants walked out of the magma. Xiaohua looked at the old stone giant gathering his people, and then at the Buddha statue in the shrine. At this moment, the cracks were getting deeper, and there was even some red liquid seeping out, just like the blood on the body. Xiaohua's heart thumped, and he whispered, "Master, perhaps I was wrong. Master is borrowing the power of Namo Maitreya Buddha to use Dharma. Maybe you're robbing Jiang Luer's opportunity." Buddha Bodhi's eyebrows twitched slightly, and he lowered his head and said, "Namo Maitreya Buddha, this Dharma has said that it's fate and tribulation. If this Dharma wants to help these stone giants survive, this Dharma can't be considered one by one. Actually, you don't have to do this." Xiaohua smiled and said, "What the stone giants need are fire-type primordial stones. Although there are no ready-made ones in the magma, as long as they master the method to absorb fire-type primordial qi, wouldn't it have the same effect as taking fire-type primordial stones? I only need to use Dharma to let them know how to cultivate. I'm afraid things aren't as simple as you think." Buddha Bodhi glanced at the damaged Buddha statue in the shrine and said, "Since there's a Buddha statue of Namo Maitreya Buddha here, it's impossible for it to appear out of thin air. Presumably, Luer must have been here in his previous life. If Luer can come here, then his Dharma cultivation is definitely more profound than this Dharma. If even he can't enlighten these stone giants, how can this Dharma do it? How can Dharma do it?" Sigh. Xiaohua had always relied on Taoism's divine abilities, and his thoughts were similar to those of Taoism's experts. He felt that everything could be solved by Taoism's divine abilities. Now that he heard Buddha Bodhi's words, it was as if he was enlightened. He sucked in a breath of cold air, and said with some sincerity, "I was wrong. Enlightening these stone giants can't rely on Dharma or Taoism for a moment, but the power of time and a tenacious heart. Only when one accumulates 1,000 miles can it be effective. Namo Maitreya Buddha, that's exactly it." Buddha Bodhi nodded. "Although we Buddhists don't teach secular people, and are somewhat different from Confucian cultivators, we have the same effect in praising the Dharma." As he said that, Buddha Bodhi glanced at the Buddha statue again and said, "Luer might have known this in his previous life, but why didn't he do it? Was it because he didn't have enough time, or was it because he didn't have the right opportunity? This is hard to figure out. It's probably because there was an opportunity to leave this continent, and he didn't have time to do these things, so he left his Buddha statue behind to teach the stone giants." Xiaohua smiled. Unfortunately, this enlightenment took a wrong path, and only let the stone giants understand the 6 words Namo Maitreya Buddha. Let this little monk walk this unfinished path for him. Buddha Bodhi also smiled, and said, "It's a pity that this little monk came in a hurry, and didn't transform into Luer's appearance. Form isn't emptiness, emptiness isn't form, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Grand Master, you're a little stubborn." Xiaohua smiled. Although the old stone giant couldn't communicate with Xiaohua and the others, now that he had obtained the root of wisdom, his mind was clear and bright. His command of the stone giant tribe was different from before. He spoke less of the name, Namo Maitreya Buddha, and his movements were orderly. Not long after, the tribe members who were slightly closer to the shrine had already lined up and waited in the magma. Those stone giants who had previously taken the primordial stones also walked over and placed the primordial stones beside the old stone giant. The old stone giant looked at the stone giants, then raised his hand slightly and turned to Buddha Bodhi. Buddha Bodhi understood and stepped on a Buddhist lotus to the top of the shrine. The old stone giant put his palms together and said, "Namo Maitreya Buddha." The stone giants called out Namo, Namo Maitreya, or Namo Maitreya, and worshipped with incomparable devotion. When the stone giants straightened up, Buddha Bodhi held a flower with both hands, and it turned into 1,000 arms that fell on the stone giants' foreheads. Seeing that the magma was filled with spiritual light and countless primal stones, the stone giants' eyes flashed with clarity. When Buddha Bodhi withdrew the Buddhist light, his body trembled slightly, and the stone giants said, "Namo Maitreya Buddha." "Good." Buddha Bodhi's eyes narrowed, and his gaze was filled with compassion as he said. Then Buddha Bodhi sat cross-legged on the lotus, closed his eyes, Enchanted Buddhist scriptures. After the stone giants bowed and saluted the old stone giant, they took their own primordial stones and left through the magma. They didn't stop for long. Xiaohua stood at the side and didn't look carefully. He only occasionally looked at the Buddha statue in the shrine. The cracks on the statue were getting bigger and deeper, and an unfathomable expression appeared on his face. After a few days, the stone giants were all enlightened by Buddha Bodhi. Xiaohua looked around and found that there were actually close to 10,000 stone giants living in this several hundred li wide magma. It was no wonder that the fire-type primal stones in the magma were all dug out, and not a single one could be found. After a few days, Buddha Bodhi began to teach the stone giants simple Buddhist scriptures. However, after a few tries, he gave up and followed Confucian cultivator Xiaohua's suggestion to start from the very beginning. After another half a day, seeing that Buddha Bodhi was too busy, Xiaohua simply took out his remaining disciples from the space and had them teach the 10,000 stone giants how to recognize and pronounce words. Of course, the language that Xiaohua and Buddha Bodhi chose was the human language of the ruins. -13. Chapter 4189. Looking at the huge stone giants sitting in the magma and learning from Fujiwen and the others, Xiaohua suddenly had a familiar feeling. It was as if he had returned to the time when he was struggling to learn. However, at the same time, Xiaohua was a little worried in his heart. The Buddha statue in the shrine had almost been broken into two halves. The crack from the top cut across the heart of the Buddha statue and went all the way to the lower body. Crimson liquid flowed like a candle's tears onto the 9 lotus platforms below the Buddha statue. If it weren't for the 9 lotus platforms protecting the Buddha statue, the entire Buddha statue would have been completely split apart. Dragon Vein Xiaohua and Phoenix Body Xiaohua did not return. Xiaohua also did not receive any messages from them. However, Xiaohua was not alarmed. Presumably, even if the two clones encountered any danger, their lives would not be in danger. On this day, the entire magma lake was producing rhythmic sounds of reading. Xiaohua, who was sitting cross-legged, suddenly frowned and looked outside the magma lake with some surprise. Rumble! A slight tremor came from the ground. Even though the magma had already offset a lot of the tremor, it could still be heard under the magma. The old stone giant who was struggling to pronounce the words immediately stood up from the ground and called out very fluently, "Namo Maitreya Buddha! Namo Maitreya Buddha!" In a moment, all the stone giants who were learning how to pronounce the words stood up and shouted loudly. A fighting spirit emerged from these stone giants. "Enemy! Enemy!" The old stone giant only now remembered that Buddha Bodhi was beside him. He hastily pointed above and stammered, "Go!" Buddha Bodhi nodded and waved his hand to give an order. Then, the old stone giant called out, "Namo Maitreya Buddha!" An orderly arranged a group of stone giants to rush out of the underground space from various parts of the magma lake. "We will also go out and take a look. It seems like something interesting has happened." Xiaohua smiled and said to Buddha Bodhi and Confucian cultivator Xiaohua and the other clones, "This little monk has the same intention." Buddha Bodhi nodded and stood up on his Buddhist lotus. Xiaohua, however, shook his head. "Fellow Taoists, let's go. I have been dizzy from these rocks for the past few days. I still want to take a look at the magma and refine my wood origin." "All right, go ahead, fellow Taoist. Just be careful." When Xiaohua first saw the Buddhist shrine, he had already clearly seen the bottom of the magma. There was a completely different world under that oval-shaped hole. There were even a few places inside that Xiaohua's divine sense couldn't penetrate. The stone giant couldn't enter, so he naturally didn't know. Xiaohua had been concentrating on teaching the stone giant for the past few days, so he didn't have the mood to explore. Now that he heard that the bone-honing Xiaohua wanted to go, he naturally reminded him. "Rest assured, fellow Taoist." Bone-honing Xiaohua laughed. "I know what I'm doing." When the bone-honing Xiaohua's figure fell into the hole, Xiaohua led the group of disciples and his avatar out of the magma lake. When Xiaohua escaped out of the ground, he was met with a dense aura of desolation. That viscous heaven and earth origin energy made him unable to help but take a deep breath. When his whole body felt comfortable, he couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Damn it, this group of stone men! There was clearly heaven and earth origin energy around them that could save their lives, yet they insisted on looking for origin stones. If they hadn't met me, I'm afraid they would have starved to death while hugging the gold mountain. Fellow Taoist thinking is too simple. Confucian cultivator Xiaohua laughed. These stone men originally had stone brains. Other than knowing how to find origin stones, they don't know anything else. If ordinary people want to cultivate Taoist techniques, they also have to rely on luck. If their aptitude is slightly lacking, they won't be able to sense heaven and earth origin energy. You want these stone men who don't know how to speak and don't know how to cultivate to learn Taoist techniques? That's really difficult. AI indeed. Xiaohua nodded. I don't remember much about my childhood, but I still have some impressions. I's path of seeking Tao when I was young was very tortuous. Even since I had memories of hidden immortal continent, I's path of cultivation wasn't smooth. In short, what Master wants to do is extremely difficult. Fu Jiwen, who was standing respectfully at the side, heard this and echoed. However, if it can really be done, the merit of teaching is really enough for Master to use. Jiwen is right. Confucian cultivator Xiaohua agreed. Which one of us Confucian cultivators didn't have the merit of teaching? Confucius, Mencius, each and every one of them has a merit as vast as the Milky Way. Haha. Hearing this, Xiaohua suddenly laughed. He patted his head and said, I was fooled by the little monk. Damn it, Luo's cultivation in his previous life was indeed deeper than mine, but what he can't do, it doesn't mean that we can't do it. It's impossible to travel 1,000 miles without taking a few steps, but if we have a direction, we can naturally reach it with the help of flying equipment. Oh? Ha! Confucian cultivator Xiaohua was slightly stunned. After a moment, he also came to his senses. He looked at Buddha Bodhi and said with a smile, Yes, it's really like this. We have a heaven-defying space, why can't we use it? Xiaohua and the others landed on a nearby mountain ridge. As they spoke, groups of stone giants also walked out from various places on the vermilion ground. At this time, between the mountains, a large number of stone giants appeared out of nowhere. These stone giants lined up, holding some strange stone tools in their hands. They neatly encircled the entire plain. It was this orderly pace that alarmed the old stone giant under the magma. Xiaohua's divine sense swept over these stone giants, and he couldn't help but frown. Except for the stone tools in their hands, these attacking stone giants didn't look any different from the stone giants in the magma. Namo Maitreya Buddha! Just as Xiaohua was puzzled, the stone giants that came out of the magma had already formed a formation. Moreover, this formation didn't look much inferior to the stone giants that surrounded them. Following the old stone giant's roar, all the stone giants waved their fists and rushed towards the besieged stone giants. In just a moment, a tragic scene appeared in front of Xiaohua and the others. Whether it was the attacking stone giants or the defending stone giants, they all began to be injured. Some had lost arms, some had broken legs, and some had even lost half of their heads. However, no matter how injured they were, the two sides of the stone giants didn't shrink back. They attacked with all their might, trying their best to kill the other side in their own hands. Xiaohua and the other clones, as well as many disciples, stayed on top of the mountain peak to watch, but they didn't make a move. Of course, based on the current battle situation, not to mention Xiaohua, even Fu Jiwen and the other disciples could definitely kill the invading stone giants. However, Fu Jiwen and the others couldn't make a move because they didn't understand why these stone giants were attacking the stone giants in the magma. Strange! Confucian cultivator Xiaohua looked at the two sides that were in a stalemate and asked in a low voice. All wars in the world have a cause. On the surface, the great war of the Tao of the Ruins was for the billions of wandering souls, but in secret, it was for the origin of wood, and even for the formation of the demonic spirit. Why are these two stone giants here? For the fire attribute primordial stones? There are no primordial stones in the magma, so it's impossible for these stone giants to not know. What if it's to kill the other side? These two sides are both stone giants, so there's no reason for them to naturally counter each other. Martial uncles, Jiang Hong said in a low voice from the side. These invading stone giants, they're not shouting Namo Maitreya Buddha, but it seems to be dragon language. Ah? Dragon language? Xiao Hua was startled, and immediately listened carefully. Sure enough, the attacking stone giants seemed to be vaguely shouting, "Long live the dragon god! Long live the dragon god!" which was exactly opposite to the Namo Maitreya Buddha that the magma stone giants were shouting. Damn it, there's something strange! Xiao Hua patted his forehead, somewhat vexed. Could it be that these stone giants aren't here for the primordial stones? Could it be that they're here for the so-called faith? Could it be that on this mysterious continent, other than Namo Maitreya Buddha, there's another dragon god? Master, take a closer look. Jiang Hong looked carefully at the side and said, Those stone giants shouting dragon god seem to have some dragon markings on their bodies, but these dragon markings are extremely few, only half a trace or a trace. Correct. That's exactly the case. Confucian cultivator Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and nodded. Previously, I couldn't see clearly, but now that they're shouting Long live the dragon god and fighting with the magma stone giants, I can see clearly. Not only that, these magma stone giants also have an extremely faint swastika character on their bodies, don't you think so, Master Subhuti? Namo Maitreya Buddha! How could Buddha Subhuti not see this? His eyes were filled with compassion, and he chanted the name of Buddha. Although the stone giants weren't humans, they were still alive, and in this kind of slaughter, it was inevitable that there would be casualties. Green-robed fellow Taoist, Xiao Hua instructed. Use a thunderous method to make these stone giants stop fighting. I really don't understand why they're fighting. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua smiled and said, Fellow Taoist, you're confused. Green-robed fellow Taoist and soul cultivator fellow Taoist are building a transfer array, they're not here. Then I'll have to trouble you, fellow Taoist Confucian cultivator. Xiao Hua was truly somewhat anxious, and said impatiently, Make them quickly stop this senseless slaughter. And this young one understands. Confucian cultivator Xiao Hua naturally understood what Xiao Hua was thinking. He waved his hand, and tens of millions of 5G righteous thunders appeared out of thin air. With a rumbling sound, they struck down, scaring all the stone giants into a daze on the spot. Namo Maitreya Buddha! The magma stone giants took the lead to shout, and each of them covered their heads and fled towards the entrance of the magma. The attacking stone giants were no exception, and after only holding on for a few breaths, they also fled in panic. Jiang Hong! Seeing the stone giants run away, Xiao Hua instructed. Transform into your figure, and follow these stone giants to see what's going on. Yes, disciple understands. Jiang Hong's body surged with dragon markings, and her figure immediately flew up. -13. Chapter 4190. Fellow Taoist, you go accompany Jiang Hong. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and ordered. Don't let anything happen to Jiang Hong. Good. Xiao Hua didn't refuse. His figure flickered and he followed Jiang Hong to chase after the stone giants. Then, Xiao Hua looked at the messy plains. At this time, there were many broken limbs on the ground. They were thrown there like stones. There was no stone giant to take these broken limbs away. AI, why is there a war everywhere? Xiao Hua sighed and waved his hand, leading many disciples to escape into the magma. The old stone giant couldn't speak, so he couldn't tell Xiao Hua what happened. Xiao Hua also didn't force him. He waited for the stone giants to rest for half a day, then he had the stone giants form a formation. He took out the Kunlun mirror from his bosom, and with the command of Buddha Bodhi, he sent all the stone giants into the space under the urging of his magic power. Because of their belief in Buddha Bodhi, these stone giants were easily sent into the space. Moreover, inside the space, Jade Archive Xiao Hua had already created an illusion of a magma lake for them. Many stone giants entered the space without any rejection, just like the magma lake that extended out of the mysterious continent. In his own space, Jade Archive Xiaohua could do whatever he wanted. First, he waved his hands and sent countless soul threads into the foreheads of these stone giants like lightning bolts. He taught these stone giants ordinary cultivation methods, and then after a little thought, he sent some ancient books of Confucian cultivators and some essences of Buddhist sects into their minds. Xiaohua even created tens of thousands of Buddha Bodhi to teach these stone giants how to speak. This was the idea that Xiaohua had previously thought of. Jiang Luer's previous life might have been more powerful than Xiaohua's current cultivation, but he didn't have the space, so he didn't have the ability to control space. As for Xiaohua, although he was not omnipotent in this space, teaching these stone giants how to speak and decipher words was still quite easy. Jade Archive Xiaohua's ability to teach was hard to say, but his method of imparting Dao magic was indeed first class. After receiving Jade Archive Xiaohua's teachings, all the stone giants closed their eyes and meditated, seemingly gaining something. After a few days, although these stone giants couldn't really speak, they were forced to speak by their experiences. After another dozen or so days, all of the stone giants could clearly express their thoughts. Therefore, Xiaohua struck while the iron was hot and sent them out of the space. He also had Fu Jiwen and the other disciples give them instructions. On one hand, he explained the cultivation technique, and on the other hand, he was familiar with the language. It was truly beyond Buddha Bodhi's expectations. Xiaohua's actions were extremely effective. In the span of a dozen days, the stone giants in the magma lake seemed to have been reborn. Learning to read and write was the most basic. Many of the stone giants had already begun to discuss the essence of cultivation. In particular, most of the stone giants were devout and interested in the Buddhist scriptures. They all sat cross-legged around Buddha Bodhi and listened to him talk about the scriptures. At this point, Xiaohua finally understood the ins and outs of the situation. The magma stone giants had begun to worship Namo Maitreya the moment they formed their own race. The Buddha statue in the shrine had always been there for them to worship. Of course, they didn't know where the shrine came from or who it was worshipping. They only knew how to say, Namo Maitreya the Buddha. Moreover, each stone giant was different, so they didn't know the full story. The stone giants in the magma lake lived on fire attribute source stones. Normally, they would look for source stones to fill their stomachs in the magma lake. However, in the past few decades, it was unknown whether it was because the stone giants were reproducing too quickly or because the number of fire attribute source stones had decreased, but the number of source stones they could find had decreased. If it weren't for the fact that they had accumulated some source stones in the past few years, some of the stone giants might have starved to death. As for the invading stone giants, they also lived in the magma lake. They were hundreds of miles away from each other. The living environment of the stone giants was similar to the living environment of this group of stone giants. Long ago, the two groups of stone giants had fought and killed each other, but the scale was not large. But recently, because the source stones had decreased, the number of fights had increased. Almost every dozen or so days, there would be a fight. There were even 4 or 5 stone giants gathered around the magma lake. These stone giants also fought with each other. The stone giants in front of Xiaohua believed in Namo Maitreya the Buddha and weren't particularly aggressive. The stone giants that believed in the dragon god weren't so easy to talk to. Not only did they attack this group of stone giants, they also attacked other stone giants. In addition to the fighting between the stone giants, there were other races entrenched around the magma lake. The golden armored dwarf and strange bird that Xiaohua had seen before were all of them. However, because the stone giants had just learned how to express themselves, they couldn't speak clearly. Moreover, these races were similar to the stone giants. They all lived in strange places. If ordinary divine senses didn't carefully investigate, they wouldn't be discovered. These races were similar in strength to the stone giants. Although they had some conflicts with the stone giants, as long as they didn't invade the other party's territory in batches, it wouldn't cause a war between the two sides. As for that night, when the stone giants went to rescue the younger stone giants, they passed through the borders of the golden-armored dwarf and strange bird's territory and were attacked by the two. The stone giants generally moved around in the magma lake and rarely went to the surface. Therefore, the stone giants only knew about the situation within 1,000 miles. They didn't know much about the situation beyond that. Even so, Xiaohua learned from the stone giants that there was a powerful prehistoric strange beast several thousand miles away. After hearing the old stone giant explain the general situation with a stutter, Xiaohua nodded with a smile. He looked at the scholarly cultivator Xiaohua and said, "Fellow Immortal, what the stone giants said is correct. However, they haven't walked on the surface for a long time. The information might be wrong. Or perhaps, the primeval beasts in their eyes might not be able to enter our eyes. When the prehistoric secret treasure appeared that day, the closest aura was at least several 100,000 miles away from here. It's unlikely that it's the one that the stone giants spoke of. It shouldn't be." Scholarly cultivator Xiaohua agreed. "Those who dare to reveal their aura when the prehistoric secret treasure appears are all experts of this continent. For the stone giants to know about it, I'm afraid it's not particularly strong. Unfortunately, although the stone giants look tall, they actually have timid hearts. The range of their activities is really limited and they don't know much. They can't give us a general understanding of the entire continent," Xiaohua said with some regret. Scholarly cultivator Xiaohua nodded and said, "That's right. If that little guy wasn't really hungry and didn't know about the nearby dangers after seeing fellow Taoists fall into the distant mountain peak, he wouldn't have rashly gone to look for you. Otherwise, we wouldn't have found this place." Xiaohua looked at the Buddha statue that had been completely split into two halves on the shrine and replied somewhat absent-mindedly, "Yes, this might be fate." As he said this, Xiaohua's gaze passed over the Buddha statue and looked at Buddha Bodhi, who was teaching the stone giants Buddhist doctrine. A faint knot quietly emerged in his heart. "Fellow Taoist!" At this moment, the bone-honing Xiaohua called out to Xiaohua, "Come down and take a look. This place is a bit strange." "Oh?" Xiaohua was taken aback. He had already used his divine sense to explore the magma lake where the stone giants lived. However, it was just a magma lake that led underground, and there was nothing special about it. Of course, Xiaohua had only taken a rough look. The deeper he went into the magma lake, the more divine sense he could sense. Moreover, it was harmful to his divine sense, so Xiaohua did not seriously explore the magma lake. However, he didn't expect there to be something strange under the magma lake. Xiaohua and scholarly cultivator Xiaohua exchanged a glance. Their figures flickered as they flew into the hole. Both of them were very powerful, so they did not attract the attention of the Fortune Gate's disciples or even the stone giants. Below the hole was a passage several li wide. The walls of the passage were made of solid rock, and the magma lake emitted a dark red hue when it hit the rocks. There was nothing interesting to see inside the passage. Xiaohua's divine sense swept over the passage and continued to fly down. After traveling for more than 100 miles, the temperature in the vicinity had reached an extremely high level. The previously dark red magma had already begun to emit a bright red color. Faint ripples were also being produced within the magma, flying into the distorted void due to the burning of the magma. "If I'm not mistaken, this mainland should still be the upper realm." Xiaohua looked at his protective barrier, which was shaking under the high temperature of the magma lake, and said decisively, "I remember when I was in the flame forest swamp, I also went deep into the magma lake. Although it wasn't this deep, the magma wasn't even half as hot as here. This kind of heat is not something the cultivation world can withstand." And scholarly cultivator Xiaohua nodded. "There is a faint trace of Xiantian true qi in the magma lake. This Shaoxing has absorbed it. This kind of Xiantian true qi almost doesn't exist on the hidden immortal mainland." As the two of them spoke, they flew for several li and reached the end of the passage. After exiting the passage, they arrived at a huge space filled with bright red liquid. This liquid was much more delicate than the magma lake, and there were thumb-sized crystal stones floating around. These were fire attribute source stones. However, Xiaohua's divine sense did not linger on these source stones for long. Instead, he looked at the center of the space. In the center of the space, there was a huge stone pillar that extended straight from the bottom of the magma lake into the space. The top of this stone pillar looked quite flat, and it was several mu in size. At this moment, Bonhoning Xiaohua was standing on top of it, looking at the pile of bones in front of him in a daze. The bones were very thick and large, almost occupying the top of the several mu in size stone pillar. Fellow Taoist! Bonhoning Xiaohua did not turn his head and said, "Quickly come and take a look at these bones, they are really strange." Xiaohua flew close to the stone pillar, but he did not look at the bones first. Instead, he looked around with his divine sense, and then asked curiously, "Fellow Taoist, how did you come here?" "The fire attribute source energy of heaven and earth here is too rich, it's not good for you to refine the origin of wood." -13. Chapter 4191. Hee. Bonhoning Xiaohua turned his head and looked at Xiaohua with a smile. "I started to cultivate near the passage, but after a while, I suddenly felt that these stone giants were very pitiful. They were starving to death while guarding this magma, so I simply went to the depths of the magma to see if I could find some primordial stones for them. In the end, I found the primordial stones, and I also found these bones." "Oh?" Xiaohua was startled and looked at Bonhoning Xiaohua with some astonishment. He even sized him up a few times. Bonhoning Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled and asked curiously, "What's wrong? Fellow Taoist, is there something wrong with I?" Xiaohua had a smile on his face and asked, "This feeling, when did it start?" "What feeling?" Bonhoning Xiaohua was stunned and asked back. "I just feel that those stone giants are pitiful," Xiaohua replied. "Just now." Bonhoning Xiaohua was really at a loss. "Congratulations, fellow Taoist, congratulations, fellow Taoist." Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist, you have a sympathetic heart. You are not far from becoming a real person." Hee, is that so?" Bonhoning Xiaohua touched his bald head in embarrassment, and replied embarrassedly. Xiaohua asked with interest, "If I let fellow Taoist control the celestial white bones again, how confident would fellow Taoist be?" Bonhoning Xiaohua pondered a little and seemed to understand something. He nodded and said, "I don't have much confidence now, but I seem to have confidence. I dare to control the celestial white bones." "Good!" Xiaohua clapped and said with a smile, "I had been thinking about how to use the Tao Sect's secret technique to control the celestial white bones. I even thought about using the secret technique of sacrificial refining to refine the celestial white bones. Moreover, to be honest with you two fellow Taoists, I have already let green-robed Xiaohua look at the cultivation methods I obtained from the ruins. I want to find the method to suppress the celestial white bones. However, according to fellow Taoist tempered bones, if we want to control the Deva bones, we can't do it from the outside. That's an inferior method. We should use superior methods to control the Deva bones from the inside out." Xiaohua, the Confucian cultivator, had been studying the classics of Confucianism ever since he was born. He had a lot of experience in thinking, so he had a good understanding of these seemingly profound things. He said, "Fellow Immortal, you mean, to let fellow immortal tempered bones develop human emotions, and use these emotions to influence the wisp of consciousness inside the celestial bones, and finally assimilate it?" "That's right. That's exactly it." Xiaohua nodded. "The thing that controls the celestial white bones is that triangular blood bone. The strand of consciousness within this blood bone is extremely strong and tyrannical. Just refining this consciousness alone would take thousands or even tens of thousands of years. I even felt that there would be a risk of backlash. Moreover, if I sacrificially refined this consciousness, there would be a barrier between the consciousness and the white bones, and it would be difficult to achieve perfect control. Only by slowly assimilating it would it be possible to firmly control the celestial white bones." Speaking up to here, Xiaohua smiled again. He looked at the white bones on the stone pillar and said, "Of course, these are just some of I's guesses. Fellow Taoist tempered bones has to try to know. Let's not talk about the celestial white bones anymore. Fellow Taoist tempered bones, is there anything strange about these white bones? Oh, it's like this. Xiaohua raised his hand and held a white bone that was several feet thick in his hand. He pointed at the white bone and said, "When I came here, before I even saw those primordial stones, I sensed the power of lightning within this white bone. This power of lightning is somewhat similar to that of the celestial white bones. I thought that I had found a new celestial white bone, but when I picked up this white bone, I discovered that the power of lightning within this white bone had entered I's body and disappeared. The white bone no longer had the power of lightning. Moreover, it was also different from the celestial white bones. Although the celestial white bones were fragmented, there was a kind of vague and exuberant vitality inside. That vitality seemed to be indestructible. And these white bones are the same as ordinary white bones. They seem to be completely dead." Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Looking at these white bones, he said, "Isn't it normal for white bones to be completely dead? Celestial white bones that have vitality are actually abnormal. Fellow Taoist, don't forget that this is the mysterious continent, the upper realm," Xiaohua said in all seriousness. "Whether these white bones belong to prehistoric beasts or celestials, there should be vitality within the white bones. They shouldn't be completely dead. But aren't these white bones dead?" Xiaohua took the white bones and scanned them with his divine sense. Then, he handed them to Xiaohua. Xiaohua cultivated life energy, so he was naturally more sensitive to vitality. When he took the white bones, he already sensed it. "So, the origin of these white bones is a bit strange," Xiaohua asserted. "They must have died under an incomparably powerful lightning strike. A fatal strike." "Perhaps," Xiaohua replied. His divine sense scanned the pile of white bones again. Suddenly, a strange expression appeared on his face. He said, "However, these dead white bones are also useful to us." "Oh? What can they be used for?" Xiaohua was greatly puzzled. He asked curiously, "Could it be that fellow Taoist can use these white bones to make another celestial?" Xiaohua looked at Xiaohua unhappily. "You only know how to make a celestial. Don't forget, we have the Million Meng Mountains nether passage mirror in our hands. Although your soul tool has been repaired by fellow Taoist soul cultivator, it can't be perfect. Fellow Taoist green robe also obtained a lot of white bones in the spring-penetrating Forbidden Sea. Compared to these white bones, I'm afraid the difference is like heaven and earth, right?" "Haha, that's great!" Xiaohua clapped and said, "With these white bones, fellow Taoist soul cultivator can also refine other soul tools." "Exactly!" Xiaohua released his divine sense and collected these white bones. He said with a smile, "It's not easy to come to the upper realm. Why don't we fish for more benefits? Everything in the prehistoric realm is useful to us." "Haha, of course, not to mention these white bones, even these crystals look several times better than those in the hidden Immortal continent." Xiaohua laughed. He opened his mouth and spat out a beam of light, which turned into thousands of light threads and fell into the magma. When the beam of light flew back, each light thread carried a crystal. "Here." Xiaohua took the crystal and didn't keep it. Instead, he put it in his spatial ring and handed it to Xiaohua. He said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, give it to the stone giants. If it weren't for fellow Taoist's opportunity, we wouldn't know there were crystals here." "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Xiaohua grinned and reached out to take it. He said, "I hope the stone giants can learn the cultivation method fellow Taoists taught them before they use up all these crystals. They don't need to be proficient in anything, as long as they don't starve." "Don't worry," Xiaohua replied with a smile. "Although these stone giants have just been enlightened, they are creatures from the upper realm and are born with innate spirituality. Perhaps they can't cultivate all the cultivation methods we taught them, but refining energy into essence is not a problem. That's," Xiaohua continued, "fellow Taoists use Taoist magic as a foundation, borrowed from the demon race's cultivation method, and even used my Confucian secret technique as a guide to tailor the cultivation method for the stone giants. If it's not easy to use, what other cultivation method in this world can be used? You flatter me, you flatter me. Xiaohua waved his hand and said to Xiaohua, Fellow Taoists, go deliver the crystals first, and then seize the time to cultivate. We will only be here for 100 years. If there are any changes in the future, we will have to rely on fellow Taoists' strength. Yes, I know, Xiaohua said and urged his figure to go up the passage. Looking at Xiaohua's back, Xiaohua said with gratification, I really didn't expect that this fellow Taoist who calls himself a celestial would also start to have the emotions of a mortal. Yes, the inheritance of Confucian cultivators is indeed no small matter. Not to mention the human race's inheritance in the 4 books and 5 scriptures, even the words used for children's enlightenment can make stubborn people develop spiritual wisdom. Xiaohua also sighed, and there was a faint sense of pride in his words. In this aspect, Taoist magic is slightly lacking. Developing spiritual wisdom might have some effect on the human race, but it definitely won't work on strange creatures like the stone giants. Xiaohua nodded and looked into the distance. There seems to be something strange over there. Fellow Taoist, will you follow I there? I won't go. Xiaohua shook his head. I also have something to do. Oh? What is it? Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. This mysterious continent has the same righteous aura as the ruins, but this righteous aura doesn't have the aura of the human race. The stone giants have already been enlightened. I want to comprehend the changes in the righteous aura, which will be of great help to my cultivation. That's right. Xiaohua clapped his hands and said, Fellow Taoist cultivates the Confucian Tao in the hidden immortal continent. No matter what, you can only comprehend it from the source. Now that you have the chance to see the source, it's an opportunity to see something from nothing. I also congratulate fellow Taoist. Hee, congratulations to you too. Xiaohua smiled mysteriously, cupped his hands, and left. Seeing that the bone-tempering Xiaohua and Xiaohua were both busy, Xiaohua was very happy. He turned around and flew to another place in the space. Just now, when Xiaohua used his divine sense to explore, he already discovered that there was a similar passage in this place. Xiaohua's 5 elements escape technique had already been cultivated to the extreme. Although he was inside the magma, the distance of several hundred li was only a moment. However, after Xiaohua flew to the bottom of the passage, he didn't rush in. Instead, he looked further into the magma with a trace of doubt on his face. He saw that there was also a several mu large stone pillar standing out from the bottom of the magma. Moreover, there was also a pile of white bones on top of the stone pillar. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes. He used his divine sense to explore the surroundings for a moment. Seeing that there was nothing strange, he flew over again. After landing on the stone pillar, Xiaohua picked up one of the white bones and examined it carefully. This white bone was different from the one Xiaohua saw before. It was slightly thinner and shorter. Moreover, it only covered half of the stone pillar. There was no lightning power on the white bone. Instead, there were extremely small holes that pierced through the white bone. These holes were densely packed and countless. If it was an ordinary bone, it would have been shattered long ago. However, when Xiaohua used his finger to flick it a few times, the white bone actually produced a metallic sound. It seemed to be very hard. -13. Chapter 4192. Could it be that these stone pillars are some kind of formation? Are these bones also the remains of ancient powerhouses? Xiaohua put away these bones and released his divine sense to explore nearby. Sure enough, there was another stone pillar a few hundred kilometers away, and there were also some bones on it. Xiaohua was alarmed and decided not to look for the passage anymore. Instead, he began to search the entire area within the magma. In the end, Xiaohua discovered that there were more than 10 such stone pillars. Most of them had white bones on them. These white bones were of different sizes, but no matter how big they were, if they didn't have the killing power of lightning, then they had the power to penetrate through. Xiaohua put away these bones and began to be vigilant. His divine sense swept into the depths of the magma. However, Xiaohua's divine sense penetrated thousands of kilometers into the magma, and the powerful fluctuations in the magma blocked his divine sense. Xiaohua didn't find anything strange. Those stone pillars didn't seem to be anything special. They were just hard rocks protruding from the magma. Forget it. Xiaohua received his divine sense and flew into the passage. He thought to himself, there are many unknown dangers in the ancient world. I'm only at the Mahayana realm, and I'm afraid I'm not as strong as those ancient powerhouses. These dangers, it's better not to touch them. I'm just a passerby on this continent. Xiaohua flew into the passage and flew upwards for several kilometers. Suddenly, a familiar divine sense swept over from above the passage. As soon as it touched Xiaohua, it immediately stopped. An incredulous voice sounded in Xiaohua's ears. Master? Why are you here? Although Jianhong took Xiaohua as her master, she often called him master. As for the green-robed Xiaohua, she called him martial uncle. He. Hearing Jianhong's voice, Xiaohua smiled and transmitted. Just as I expected, these stone giants were born of the same bloodline. Although they were born of the same root, they worship different things. I followed these stone giants here, and as soon as I revealed my dragon body, they immediately regarded me as a god. They insisted on inviting me here. Thinking of what Master had done there, this disciple decided to go with the flow. I was still thinking about how to inform Master, but Master followed me here. Could it be that the passage below is connected to the lava lake? Jianhong transmitted a few words to Xiaohua in a low voice. Xiaohua nodded slightly. His figure transformed into the appearance of dragon-veined Xiaohua and rushed out of the tunnel from a cave. Similar to the lava lake of the stone giants, Jianhong's lava lake was also like a large bowl. At this time, several stone giants were crawling in front of Jianhong, respectfully saluting her. The pious look on his face was very similar to that of the old stone giant. Behind these stone giants, the thousands of stone giants that had been fighting earlier were now in a neat formation. They lowered their heads, not daring to look directly at Jianhong. Behind Jianhong, there was also a similar Buddhist shrine with a mighty dragon coiled within. Master, what should we do now? Seeing Xiaohua fly out and land in front of her, Jianhong hurriedly bowed and asked, Dragon God, Dragon God. The stone giants who were originally kneeling heard the movement, and hurriedly raised their heads. Seeing the dragon form Jianhong saluting Xiaohua, they were greatly shocked. Xiaohua's dragon form seemed to be more imposing than Jianhong, and even the halo above the dragon horn made them feel a sense of worship. They couldn't help but crawl on the ground and cry out. And Xiaohua had already subdued a group of stone giants, so he naturally understood the situation of this group of stone giants. He nodded slightly and let out a cold snort. With a wave of his hand, fire attribute primordial stones fell into the lava like raindrops. Then, Xiaohua's dignified voice sounded. This is the food this sovereign bestowed to you. From now on, you don't need to invade other people. Speaking till here, Xiaohua couldn't continue. Clearly, these stone giants weren't enlightened and didn't understand what he was talking about. Moreover, these stone giants only had primordial stones in their eyes, so how could they care about what Xiaohua was talking about? Xiaohua looked at the several stone giants kneeling in front of him. Then, he raised his hand and pointed his flower-like finger at the forehead of these stone giants just like Buddha Bodhi did before. Soon after, Xiaohua also sent these stone giants into the space and opened them with a Tao secret technique. After sending these stone giants out of the space, Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at the Buddhist shrine. The dragon god statue inside was different from the Buddha statue of Namwamathriya. There weren't any changes. Thus, Xiaohua's heart became gloomy. Master! Seeing the tens of thousands of stone giants lined up in the lava, just like before, Jianhong said in a low voice. Senior brothers are all over there. If this disciple teaches these stone giants alone, I'm afraid I won't be able to take care of them. These stone giants who believe in the dragon god are different from the stone giants who believe in Buddhism. Their temperament is somewhat irritable. If they obtain a divine ability, they might invade other stone giants. At that time, Master would have to work hard for nothing, and that would be terrible. And Master understands, Xiaohua said as he took out the Kunlun mirror. First, send out the Lu family's disciples from the Kunlun Immortal realm to assist you. Then, Master will go back and discuss with your martial uncles. There must be other stone giants in the lava, so we might as well enlighten them. Okay. Jianhong naturally didn't have any objections, replying, Disciple will listen to Master's instructions. Xiaohua sent out 100 Lu family's disciples, then returned to the lava lake. He told Buddha Bodhi, Confucian cultivator Xiaohua, and the others his plan, and they all agreed. Then, under Confucian cultivator Xiaohua's suggestion, Xiaohua went to the edge of the lava lake, took out the Kunlun mirror, and sent out the tens of thousands of elite soldiers who had been fighting in the Kunlun Immortal realm. These Fortune Gate's disciples had gone through many battles, so they had long learned to obey orders. They obeyed Xiaohua's orders as if they were military orders, and there was no need for Xiaohua to explain too much. After Xiaohua finished speaking, these disciples began to plan and discuss countermeasures. In the time it took to eat half a meal, everyone had come up with a complete plan. These plans were passed to Lu Yi and the other disciples, and then to Xiaohua. When Xiaohua saw these plans, he couldn't help but be moved. What Xiaohua thought of, these disciples gave practical steps. What Xiaohua didn't think of, these disciples gave suggestions based on their own understanding. There were even many things that Xiaohua didn't consider. First of all, Xiaohua only wanted these disciples to teach the stone giants in the lava lake. These disciples felt that teaching the stone giants would hinder the heavens' justice. Moreover, if the stone giants were in trouble, other races would also be in trouble. Therefore, they suggested not only teaching the stone giants, but also the golden-armored little man and other desolate races. Secondly, Xiaohua only wanted to teach the stone giants, but these disciples felt that since the desolate land was so big, there was no harm in expanding the scope of teaching. After all, this was not a war, and some disciples with lower cultivation could also contribute. Therefore, they suggested that Xiaohua let out all the Xinhua continent's disciples that could, as a kind of travel and a kind of test. Finally, they also suggested that Xiaohua and the other Grand Ascension Realm cultivators should stay in the center and immediately teleport over to defend against any desolate beasts. Especially Xiaohua, because he controlled the Kunlun mirror. All the desolate races that were taught had to enter the Kunlun Immortal realm to be enlightened. Therefore, Xiaohua had to establish a communication channel with these disciples, and when Xiaohua was needed, Xiaohua should be there in a timely manner. Ha! Xiaohua looked at these suggestions and plans and beamed with joy. He clapped his hands and said, With such disciples in my Fortune Gate, why should I worry about the Tao Gate? Fuck, if the Immortal Emperor says half a word more, this daddy will lead the Fortune Gate to break through the Immortal Palace. Then, Xiaohua's eyes turned, and the Kunlun mirror in his hand trembled. Tens of thousands of fragments fell into the hands of these disciples, and he said, You all hold on to this item. Whenever you need this old man, use my Fortune Gate's cultivation technique, and this old man will immediately descend. Also, you all have a mission. When you search the desolate land, find a suitable place for my human race to live, and report to this old man in detail. Yes, this disciple understands. Over 10,000 disciples answered in a low voice, and their voices were quite loud. Subsequently, Xiaohua activated the Kunlun mirror. As a bright light flickered, a steady stream of Fortune Gate disciples flew out from the so-called Kunlun paradise. According to the previous agreement, Lu Yi, Yuanya, Yu Zhongquan, and other disciples led the way, flying off in different directions. Fellow Immortal. Watching groups of disciples leaving, soul cultivator Xiaohua rubbed his nose and said with a wry smile, No matter how I look at it, I feel that you're going to occupy the entire continent. I have no reason to occupy this continent. Xiaohua pursed his lips and replied, I just feel that educating the desolate lands races is a kind of merit, and it's quite troublesome for me to do it myself. That's why I'm distributing the merit to my disciples. Then why are you looking for a suitable place for the human race to live? Scholar Xiaohua was puzzled and asked again. Fellow Immortal, have you forgotten the incense cult's mission? Xiaohua smiled and said, "Don't tell me I'm going to bring the incense cult's primordial spirit cultivating disciples to the hidden immortal mainland? Are you going to treat them as Confucian cultivators? Or Tao Gate?" "Indeed," Scholar Xiaohua said as if he had just woken up from a dream. "Although this continent is mysterious and desolate land, it's still a higher realm, and is very suitable for the incense cult's disciples. The incense cult's ancestors are really amazing. They can actually divine that will come here. The Tao Gate's divination techniques are naturally amazing." Xiaohua agreed. "We've only touched the surface, and we're already vigilant about our own good or bad luck. In the future, when our cultivation deepens, we'll naturally know more. However, all divination techniques can only be used as a reference, and there might be a mistake. Isn't the little exquisite temple a good example?" -13. Chapter 4193. Also, Confucian cultivator Xiaohua asked, "Fellow Taoist, you sensed an omen of danger. We must leave as soon as possible. Aren't you afraid of causing trouble by placing the fragrance cult's disciples here? That omen is directed at us. It shouldn't involve the fragrance cult's disciples. If we bring them to the hidden immortal mainland, they will be in even more trouble than now. Moreover, I will take a look at the Karma Manual before leaving this place." Speaking of this, the Kunlun mirror in Xiaohua's hand suddenly glowed like a firefly. "Oh? That's fast, Xiaohua was surprised. "It's only been a short while, we haven't sent all the disciples out yet, but there are already disciples over there informing us that they can use the spiritual enchantment technique?" Xiaohua released his divine sense. Sure enough, several hundred li away, Yu Zhongquan was leading a group of Fortune Gate disciples deep into the mysterious ice land. There were a kind of fishmen covered in light blue scales. These fishmen were waving their fin-like arms at Yu Zhongquan, and they were chanting the same Buddhist mantra. Xiaohua's divine sense swept the fishmen into his space, asking Buddha Subhuti to use a Buddhist technique to enchant these fishmen. Subsequently, Xiaohua sent these mermen back to the land of mysterious ice. When Xiaohua retracted his consciousness, he could clearly see that the Buddha statue of Jianglure in the land of mysterious ice had split into two again. In the following months, Xiaohua and his avatars did not remain idle. As the Fortune Gate disciples spread out, more and more strange races were sent into the space for the spiritual enchantment. These races were similar to the stone giants, but their appearance and living environment were completely different. There were small golden armored people who lived in places where the gold mist condensed, fish people who lived in places where the gold mist condensed, earth giants who lived in mountain caves, and tree men who lived in boundless forests. Not all of these prehistorical creatures believed in Namo Maitreya and the dragon god, but they were all in a state of starvation and famine. If Xiaohua didn't show up, they might really be in danger of extinction. As the Fortune Gate disciples pushed forward, the Buddha fire inside Bodhi's body grew brighter, especially the golden threads inside his body. These golden threads danced in a spiral pattern inside the Buddha fire, and each golden thread's movement was completely different. However, the dancing of these golden threads was extremely harmonious, just like the supreme dance music between heaven and earth. Every time they twisted, the golden threads would emit a brilliant light. These lights overlapped with each other, like a resplendent gem. Things were progressing smoothly according to the Fortune Gate's disciples' plan, but Xiaohua's heart was in a mess as everything was progressing smoothly. First of all, the phoenix body Xiaohua and the dragon vein Xiaohua never returned, and there was no news from them. Xiaohua also could not sense the whereabouts of the two clones, just like when he lost the phoenix celestial body. Xiaohua wanted to bring his clones to investigate, but the Fortune Gate's disciples were busy educating the disciples, and Xiaohua had to use the Kunlun mirror at all times. Thus, Xiaohua could not leave. Secondly, although the Fortune Gate's disciples' plan was going smoothly, and the progress towards the desolate lands was also within their control. However, there were too many variant beasts in the desolate lands, and many of them were arrogant and unruly, unwilling to be educated by the Fortune Gate's disciples. They were especially resistant, and would attack the moment they saw the Fortune Gate's disciples. In the beginning, the variant beasts were not strong, and the Fortune Gate's disciples did not pay much attention to them, but as they grew stronger, the Fortune Gate's disciples began to fall. Then there was the shattering of the Buddha statue. Every time Xiaohua saw this kind of Buddha statue, the guilt he felt towards Jianglue would grow. This guilt was like a knife cutting into his heart, making his heart bleed. It was as if he was snatching away something that belonged to Jianglue. Of course, Xiaohua was clear that he had snatched Jianglue's opportunity from the moment he obtained the exquisite leaf scripture from the thunder-controlling sect on the Dawn-Rain mainland. At that time, Jianglue had not been born yet. As for this place, it was the upper realm. Based on Jianglue's cultivation when he left the hidden Immortal mainland, it would be impossible for her to reach this place in 10,000 years, or even 100,000 years. Xiaohua was also clear that he was in the upper realm, and he did not know what year or month it was on the hidden Immortal mainland. Perhaps it was 1,000,000,000 years ago, or 1,000,000,000 years later, or perhaps tomorrow morning, Jianglue, who had already attained Buddhism, could step on the clouds and appear in front of him, taking away all his entanglements. Moreover, Xiaohua was even more aware that what he had done was merely a variable derived from the heavenly Tao, and it was the will of the heavenly Tao. If it was anyone else, Xiaohua would have seized it, and he might not even bat an eyelid. However, the other party was his own junior, and this caused Xiaohua to have no choice but to feel the cruelty of the heavenly Tao. Previously, he had thought that the great Tao was everywhere, but now he felt that there were also difficulties in snatching on the great Tao. Namo Maitreya Buddha. Buddha Bodhi understood Xiaohua's thoughts the best, so he did not say anything more. While educating the alien tribes in the untainted land, he only recited Buddhist scriptures. The compassion between his eyebrows grew stronger, and the Buddha's light around him became denser and denser. At the edge of the 8th-grade lotus throne, the shadow of the 9th lotus could be vaguely seen. But because the exquisite leaf scripture was not complete, not to mention the 8th-grade lotus throne was not complete, the 9th lotus could not be born. When Buddha Bodhi saw Jinglue's Buddha statue, he had already made a decision. He had already cut himself off from the mortal world. What he needed to do now was to fight for the survival of the alien tribes in the untainted land. Buddhist fruits and good karma were no longer within his consideration. Even if he accumulated good karma because of this, Buddha Bodhi would return it all to Jianglue when he saw her. Fellow Immortal. On this day, when the sun was setting and a layer of red sunset enveloped the surroundings like a pair of shy eyes looking at the earth, Xiaohua felt sad. He was a little shocked, so he stood up from his cross-legged position and said to the Confucian cultivator beside him, Fellow Immortal Long Mai and fellow Immortal Phoenix Body did not send any news. I am a little worried, so I'll go and have a look. With that, Xiaohua handed the Kunlun mirror to the Confucian cultivator and said, The Kunlun mirror is a congenital object, and the Kunlun wonderland in it is similar to the Shenhua continent. Now that you can control the Kunlun mirror, you can do what I did in the Shenhua continent in the Kunlun wonderland. I'll leave the awakening of the alien tribes in the untainted land to you. Good. Confucian cultivator Xiaohua took the Kunlun mirror and spat out a 3-colored true qi that wrapped around it. The Kunlun mirror spun and immediately shrank to the size of a thumb and fell into Xiaohua's stomach. Xiaohua then said, Fellow Immortal, rest assured, I will take care of things here with the little monk. At this point, a mysterious smile appeared on Xiaohua's face, and he changed the topic. In addition, I have a piece of news that I don't know if it's good or bad. Oh? Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and asked curiously. What is it? Even fellow Immortal is a little hesitant. After fellow Immortal Tempered Bones enlightened the alien tribes, he began to have simple emotions, and I seemed to be able to sense the existence of the Shenhua continent. Xiaohua looked into Xiaohua's eyes and replied word by word. Hiss! Xiaohua sucked in a breath of cold air, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. He finally knew the reason for Xiaohua's hesitation. The Shenhua continent that Xiaohua mentioned was naturally not the Shenhua continent within the Kunlun immortal realm that Xiaohua told the Fortune Gate disciples, but Xiaohua's space. Xiaohua's space was Xiaohua's biggest secret. Until now, Xiaohua had never told Lu Yi, Fujiwen, and the other disciples. All of them also thought that the Shenhua continent was within the Kunlun immortal realm. As for Xiaohua's several clones, although Xiaohua did not intend to hide anything, he never thought that his clones could sense his space. In particular, although Confucian cultivator Xiaohua's words were very ambiguous, the meaning was clear. Now that Xiaohua could only sense space, then one day he would be able to enter the space without Xiaohua. Even, there was a possibility that Xiaohua would be able to control the space. Since Xiaohua had this ability, what about the green-robed Xiaohua, the soul cultivator Xiaohua, and the phoenix physique Xiaohua? In the future, they would naturally be able to enter the space at will. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's heart suddenly became alarmed. Damn it, this fellow immortal is not the first clone to be able to sense space. The most powerful one is the green-robed one. This guy is the first clone to be able to freely enter and exit the space. The earliest should be in the spring Forbidden Sea, right? No, it might be too early. Those few times when I was in danger, he came out of the space to control the body when I fainted, but I did not care too much. If fellow immortal did not mention it, I'm afraid I would still be in the dark, right? When he thought of his only secret being controlled by his 10 clones, Xiaohua's heart became empty for no reason. He had lost the most important thing. Looking at Xiaohua's smile that was not a smile, Xiaohua asked, "Fellow immortal, did you only have this feeling today?" In the past, it was vague, but recently it became clear. Xiaohua did not hide it and replied, "I, a Confucian cultivator, emphasized not to look at indecent things and not to approach indecent things, so I felt that I should tell fellow immortal." Green-robed Xiaohua naturally did not have such moral integrity, so he could enter and exit the space without fear. "Forget it." Xiaohua pondered for a moment, and said with a bitter smile, "Shenhua continent is our own. We can hide it from others, but there is no need to hide it from fellow Taoists. And, fellow immortal can rest assured. Fellow immortal is our main body, you are the master of the space. We can only enter and exit the space." Xiaohua said again, "Actually, if we have more abilities, we can probably help fellow immortal more." -13. Chapter 4194. Xiaohua pondered for a moment, then replied with a smile, "Actually, there's nothing wrong with that. Since you can sense the Shenhua continent, then it's just like using a spatial ring. You can use your divine sense to take things out of it. You are this Zhao's avatars, so your divine sense should be the same as this Zhao's mind. This Xiaoxing can't do it now." Xiaohua raised the Kunlun mirror in his hand and smiled. "This Xiaoxing will use this for the time being. Up to you." Xiaohua nodded and urged his magic power to teleport. At this moment, a powerful rumbling sound rushed into the sky from a distant mountain peak. Xiaohua frowned. In the past few days, the Fortune Gate had encountered some tough opponents. From time to time, there would be some small-scale battles, but today's sound was the first time. Xiaohua glanced at Xiaohua. Before he could say anything, Xiaohua's body slightly moved, and a Kunlun mirror appeared in front of his chest. At this moment, the Kunlun mirror flickered again. Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed at it. Buzz! A beam of light flew out, penetrating into the void and disappearing. In just a few breaths' time, a large number of primitive Wood Clan members with human faces and tree bodies flew into the Kunlun mirror from the beam of light. "Thank you for your hard work, fellow immortal." Xiaohua didn't say much. His figure flickered, and he flew towards the source of the rumbling sound. The mysterious continent was a primitive image of desolation. It was even more vast than the legacy world that Xiaohua had seen before. Huge mountain ridges stood on the ground, and there were huge rocks and trees on the mountain ridges. The rocks were comparable to the hills of the hidden immortal continent, and the trees were comparable to the mountains of the hidden immortal continent. Even the short vegetation on the mountain ridges was like an ordinary forest in the eyes of the Fortune Gate's disciples. The mountain ridges were also different from what Xiao Hua had seen before. It was not an ordinary mountainous region. Some places were similar to where the stone giants lived. They were filled with crimson magma, which was so hot that it could burn everything. Some places were ice valleys piled up with mysterious ice that was billions of years old. They were jade green and cold to the point that they could freeze everything. There were even many places that were filled with jade talismans that were condensed from gold qi. These jade talismans were like flowers that covered the earth. They looked very dazzling, but if an ordinary person were to come into contact with this gold qi, their entire body would be pierced into mud. Xiao Hua's figure flew over this huge mountain range, just like a bird flying by. He didn't attract anyone's attention. Xiao Hua's gaze swept over this mountain range, and he laughed in his heart. The Fortune Gate disciples carried out Huang Xiaolong's orders to the letter. Wherever they went, not to mention the magma, there were giant trees that were as hard as iron, ice that was hundreds of millions of years old, rare metal qi, wood qi, and even the unknown refining materials on the mountain peaks, as well as the unknown spiritual herbs on the mountain ridges. Anything that could be used was taken away by them. Of course, the Fortune Gate disciples did not drain the pond to fish and burn the forest to hunt. They took 80% of everything and left only 20%. This made Xiao Hua feel even more gratified. Jie! Suddenly, a faint and clear sound rang out. High up in the sky, a biting cold wind blew over. It was as if the sharp qi of a flying sword had pierced straight towards Xiao Hua's head. Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and looked up. He saw a several hundred zhang large bird flapping its forewings. The bird's beak was more than 10 zhang long, and it flickered with a purple-green halo. The killing intent in the halo was sharper than a flying sword. Xiao Hua understood that there were not many bird beasts on this mainland, but if there were, they would be extremely fierce existences. The Fortune Gate disciples had encountered this big bird before. Its strength was outstanding. More than 10 spirit-severing stage Fortune Gate disciples besieged it, but they were unable to defeat it. It was not that spirit-severing stage cultivators were not strong enough. It was just that this huge bird was a primordial beast. Every inch of the bird's body and every single feather was soaked in primordial aura. It was even harder than any magic tool. How could a human cultivator's magic tool break through it? Moreover, when the big bird flapped its forewings, there were strong astral winds that were comparable to the earth, fire, wind, and lightning. How could the Fortune Gate's disciples resist? In the end, hundreds of Fortune Gate disciples formed a sword array and sent out sword lights to cut off several of the big bird's feathers. Only then did the big bird scare off. But no one had expected that this big bird would hold a grudge. After several days, it actually waited for Xiao Hua to be alone before suddenly attacking. Hee! Xiao Hua looked at the big bird and already knew what it was. He sneered, and his divine sense slammed down on the big bird's head like a hammer. Caw! The big bird saw the formless divine sense descending like a mountain. It didn't know what was going on, but it was greatly alarmed. Its entire attack immediately became chaotic. 2 of its forewings hastily flapped horizontally, wanting to change direction. It was also at this moment. Boom! Xiao Hua's divine sense hammer smashed into the back of the big bird. Kung kung kung! A burst of metallic sound rang out. Sparks flew from the back of the big bird. At this time, Xiao Hua slapped his head again. Wang! 3-colored true qi surged out, and it turned into a huge hand that grabbed at the big bird. The big bird's forewings flapped with astral winds, and at the same time, it opened its claws. Lightning condensed between the lines of its claws, piercing through the void and hitting the huge hand. Ka ka ka! The purple lightning fell into the huge hand and destroyed it. The astral winds blew over, but they only scattered the hand. They posed no threat to the huge hand at all. The huge hand carried the power of a grand ascension cultivator, and grabbed at the big bird's abdomen. The big bird was shocked, and it no longer dared to hesitate. Its feathers stood up, and thin threads of lightning appeared on the surface of its body. As its forewings flapped, there was the sound of wind and thunder. Ripples began to appear in the space around it, and the big bird used an ability similar to the lightning escape technique. It crashed into the void, and its entire body quickly disappeared. Puff! Just a few breaths before the big bird disappeared, Xiaohua's huge hand caught it. The lightning naturally couldn't stop Xiaohua's huge hand, and the huge hand grabbed a dozen or so feathers on the big bird's body. Caw! The big bird's mournful cry sounded in the distance, and it disappeared in a moment. It seemed that after this fright, it didn't dare to come back. After the big bird left, Xiaohua frowned. He looked at the 10 or so feathers that fell from the sky. Each of the feathers still had some lightning that hadn't disappeared. He thought to himself, "Strange! That big bird doesn't seem to be of the lightning attribute, so how is it able to control lightning? Moreover, last time, the Fortune Gate disciples only chased it away and didn't kill it. It won't be so vengeful that it wants to attack me again, right? Or is there something special here that's worth it for it to return?" With that thought in mind, Xiaohua waved his sleeve, and several feathers of the big bird flew into his hand. He then released his divine sense to scan the area around him. The area around him was somewhat similar to the area he had just passed. There were huge trees and boulders, and the only difference was that there was a pool of molten iron in the valley. However, most of the molten iron had been collected by the Fortune Gate's disciples, leaving only a thin layer of grayish-black luster. Xiaohua looked at the pool of molten iron for a moment, and then he flew up again. While looking at the feathers in his hand, he pondered, if there's something strange around here, it would be this molten iron. But what's so special about this molten iron? Xiaohua's flying speed was extremely fast, and he had already flown several li away in the time it took him to ponder. However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, Xiaohua seemed to have caught something, but he also didn't seem to have caught anything. His granny, what is it exactly? It seems very strange, but it also feels very normal. Xiaohua was a little confused, so he didn't even look at the big bird's feathers. He kept them into his space and looked around. Then, he raised his head and looked at the round moon. I got it! Xiaohua's body suddenly shook, and he stood still in midair. He released his divine sense again, and it swept towards the area 10,000 li around him. For half a meal's time, Xiaohua ignored the rumbling in front of him. Now that the sounds of fighting were even louder, he almost shouted, "Why is there no water on this continent? Moreover, this Xiao has been here for several hundred days, and I have never seen rain. This is really abnormal, right?" After a cultivator obtained a divine ability, they might not have the ability to call the wind and summon the rain, but their reverence towards the wind, rain, thunder, and lightning of the world was much smaller. Even some rainstorms and snow couldn't be seen in their eyes. After Xiaohua left the hidden Immortal mainland, he came to the Upper Realm's ruins. There were very few thunderstorms in the ruins, but after all, the ruins was surrounded by a devil formation, and the weather was disturbed by the devil race, so it was normal that there were no thunderstorms. But what about this mysterious continent? In these several months, not a single drop of rain fell, and there was also no water within 10,000 li of Xiaohua's vision. This was really strange. Could it be that this mysterious continent doesn't have water? Thinking of this, Xiaohua closed his eyes, and the nascent soul in his body activated a technique. When the heaven and earth's essence energy entered the nascent soul, Xiaohua opened his eyes, revealing absolute shock. There is very little water essence energy in this world. It's not enough to rain. How is this possible? It's really strange. Every world that calls itself a realm has all 5 elements. Although the space where this Zhao Xinhua continent is located in is not completely formed, it also has the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. This mysterious continent is the upper realm. How can they not have water essence energy? Xiaohua pinched his chin and thought hard. Could it be this continent is incomplete in the time turbulence? Only metal, wood, fire, and earth, these 4 kinds of heaven and earth essence energy? But that's not right. Wasn't there a water and wind fishman near the stone giant? Isn't that Xian Bing a water element? Immediately after, Xiaohua used his delusion breaker Dharma Eye again, but he saw soul strands flashing in his Dharma Eye. Xiaohua wanted to try to use the cloud summoning rain technique, but at this moment, in the distant space, there was a loud roar. Break! Immediately after, the entire earth trembled, and a 7-colored brilliance shot up into the sky from the distance. -13. Chapter 4195. Oh, that's Yuanya's voice! Xiaohua was slightly taken aback. He retracted the soul thread and teleported away. When Xiaohua walked out of the space, he was standing in front of a hilly area. This hilly area was extremely large, spanning over 10,000 li. Under the moonlight, every hilly area emitted a faint glow. This glow was either gold, green, or yellow. On the left side of the hilly area, there were thousands of Fortune Gate disciples standing around with magic tools in their hands. Every disciple was preparing their magic power, ready to attack at any moment. Within the hills, it was a complete mess. Dozens of hills had been uprooted, and thousands of broken pieces of hills were scattered over hundreds of miles. In the night sky, 2 figures that were thousands of feet tall were currently engaged in a fierce battle. One of them was Yuanya, who had transformed into a 1,000 tall avatar. Yuanya's avatar was slightly different from ordinary human cultivators. Other than the layer of black wolf fur growing out of his body, even his arms and legs were in the shape of a wolf. What was special was that Yuanya's eyes emitted a green glow in the night sky, which was no different from a wolf's. His aura was even more ferocious than the wolf god's, which was covered in black fur, permeating the space within 1,000 li. Yuanya's opponent was a primordial strange beast that was emitting a 7-colored brilliance. This strange beast's body was like an ape's, with arms that reached past its knees. Its face was crimson red, and there was a pair of 7-colored wings on its back. These wings were somewhat similar to a peacock's, and when they flapped, not only did they emit multicolored light, but there were also strange light thorns that pierced through space. Roar! Yuanya roared again, sounding like a wolf's howl. The force of the moon and the stars fell from the sky, and Yuanya's avatar expanded once again. A huge fist streaked across the sky, smashing into the strange beast's chest like a meteor. The strange beast hissed as if it was cheering for itself, but its voice was several times louder than Yuanya's. However, the strange beast's aura was not obvious, but as it flapped its wings, the light pierced into Yuanya's battle form. Not only did it produce specks of light, but it also formed thousands of tiny vortexes on the battle form, shattering the power of the stars and moon. Seeing that Yuanya's fist was about to land on it, the strange beast's eyes rolled back, and it leaped into the air. Its ape arms danced in the air, and a series of fist shadows appeared in the night sky. Boom, boom, boom! A series of explosions rang out, and shockwaves spread out in all directions. The Fortune Gate disciples who were on guard in the distance felt their bodies emitting a faint glow. Looking at the beast and man, the beast was tumbling in the air, but it quickly regained its balance with the help of its wings. Then it let out a roar and charged at Yuanya once more. On the other hand, Yuanya seemed to be at a disadvantage. The strange beast's movements were extremely fast, and it had already sent out several punches. The combined force of the punches sent Yuanya's body flying. Although Yuanya had regained his balance and even swept his legs horizontally, the strange beast's ape arms landed on Yuanya's legs again, and Yuanya fell to the ground. Then, the strange beast's hind legs stomped on the ground, and it flapped its wings as it soared above Yuanya. Both of its fists slammed down, and an oppressive force caused the air to crackle. The strange beast's crimson eyes flashed fiercely as it opened its mouth and spat out a several jong wide 7-colored light beam, aiming straight for Yuanya's heart. Woo! Yuanya rolled on the ground, and his arms grabbed the nearest hill. With a loud roar, he pulled out the hill and swung it like a devil's hammer, hitting the 7-colored light beam in his hand. Boom! With a loud bang, the hill was shattered by the beam of light. The beam of light shot up into the sky, and its power dissipated. Meanwhile, the strange beast's fists landed on Yuanya's arms, and it caused his Dharma body to collapse a lot. Ao. Seeing that it had taken advantage of the situation, the The strange beast roared crazily, flapped its wings, and pounced forward again. Little devil spirit! Xiao Hua stood in the air and looked at the situation. He already knew where Yuan Ye's weakness was, so he ordered. Has the devil's spear been refined? Big brother! Devil spirit Xiao Hua hid in Xiao Hua's bloodline and didn't appear. Now that he heard Xiao Hua's call, he hurriedly replied. Little brother has been swallowing the devil spirit of the devil array, and hasn't had time to refine it. And suppress the demonic chi inside first and let Yuan Ya use it, Xiao Hua instructed. This? Devil spirit Xiao Hua hesitated. The devil spear is a devil weapon, and it's a devil weapon that can compete with the devil sword in the devil realm. Yuan Ya hasn't cultivated any devil arts, and this devil weapon might erode his mind. So what if he's a devil? Xiao Hua smiled. Isn't the devil path one of the 3,000 great paths? Don't tell me you're not walking on the path to heaven? Haha, big brother, this is my big brother. Hearing this, devil spirit Xiao Hua's whole body trembled, and he almost screamed madly in Xiao Hua's bloodline. How can there be a path in this world? How can there be a devil? It's just a way of cultivation. The human race may cultivate Tao techniques, Buddhist techniques, or Confucian techniques. The devil race naturally has to cultivate devil arts. Devil arts are not wrong, but the devil race has flaws. If the human race can cultivate devil arts, they can also become a devil fruit, and become a devil god. Whether the devil path is one of the 3,000 great paths, I haven't asserted, Xiao Hua said indifferently. But this trip to the upper realm made I understand that everything in the world has its own path of cultivation. If my human race sees the human race as the spirit of the world, and limits cultivation to the scope of my knowledge, that's short-sighted. In the eyes of the devil race, the human race is also a devil race, and also a different race. Good. While speaking, devil spirit Xiao Hua took out the dragon bone spear and said, Big brother, let Yuan Ya make do with it first. When little brother has time, I'll refine it for him again. Yeah. Xiao Hua took the dragon bone spear and said, Your devil hammer is useless. I'll lend you this for the time being. Master! Hearing Xiao Hua's voice, Yuan Ya was slightly startled, and his heart calmed down. Seeing a black lightning fall in front of him, he naturally reached out to catch it. When the devil's spear entered his hand, a scorching heat almost made him let go. When he clenched his teeth and caught it, the incomparably fierce consciousness of the bone spear poured into his mind like a tide. Yuan Ya turned pale with fright and hurriedly wanted to throw away the bone spear. How could a human cultivator like him control the devil's spear used by Devil Emperor Shao? At this moment, a green light flashed in front of Yuan Ya's eyes, and his mind became clear. His consciousness was protected by a layer of green light as if he was ascending to immortality. No matter how much the remnant consciousness of the bone spear raged around him, it was unable to cause any harm to him. Yuan Ya knew that this was his master's help, so he didn't dare to be negligent. Holding the devil spear in his hand, he roared and pounced on the strange beast. Yuan Ya was born with a unique talent and could cultivate the Big Dipper God Fist. After Xiao Hua fell into the heaven prison, he couldn't enter the space at will, so part of Yuan Ya's cultivation was taught by green-robed Xiao Hua and bone-honed Xiao Hua. Green-robed Xiao Hua had many cultivation methods. He taught Yuan Ya the Heavenly Laws embodiment technique and various body-refining secret techniques, and bone-honed Xiao Hua taught Yuan Ya the Heavenly Staff technique. At this time, Yuan Ya held the devil's spear in his hand, like a tiger that had grown wings, and his spear technique was impenetrable. The originally declining situation was reversed in just a moment. The strange beast flapped its wings, and the rainbow-colored light condensed into the shape of a bird and fell from the sky. Yuan Ya's spirit was shaken, and the devil's spear swayed. Tens of thousands of spear shadows appeared in the air, and each spear's shadow touched a rainbow-colored light and swallowed it whole. Ao! The strange beast was a little angry. It clenched its hands in the air, and then the earth shook violently. Two hills that were emitting a faint yellow light were easily pulled up from the ground by the strange beast. As the strange beast waved its arms, the hills smashed towards Yuan Ya. Good! Seeing this, Yuanya's green eyes widened, and he shouted. He raised the bone spear with both hands and stabbed it into the air. On the bone spear, a black light flashed, and the dragon horn of the bone dragon produced a wave. The void several miles in front of the tip of the spear was distorted, and the hills were attracted by the wave and crashed into the bone spear. Puff, puff. Boom! The bone spear pierced 2 hills in succession, and pierced them together. In just a moment, the power of lightning flashed around the bone dragon on the bone spear and blasted the 2 hills into powder. However, when Yuanya waved the bone spear again to look for the strange beast, there was only a rainbow-colored light in the distance. Master! Yuanya withdrew his avatar and respectfully raised the devil's spear in front of his head, saying, "This disciple likes this spear very much. Please bestow it to this disciple." This was Yuanya. He was really straightforward. Xiaohua smiled and waved his hand. He put away the demonic spear and said, "Raise your cultivation a bit more and carefully comprehend the consciousness that attacked your mind. When you can control it, it will be the day Master bestows you with the bone spear." Yes, this disciple understands. Although the devil's spear was put away by Xiaohua, the traces of the majestic consciousness were still there. Yuanya did not dare to be negligent. He hastily sat down cross-legged to comprehend the weakness of the consciousness. "Martial Ancestor!" The group of Fortune Gate's disciples bowed respectfully. "And, all of you rise!" Xiaohua smiled and said to the group of disciples, "Send a few disciples to look after your martial uncle, while the rest of you go and collect the light from the hills. This thing drifts away from the edge of the 5 elements, and it does not exist on Shenhua continent." "Yes, martial ancestor understands," a quick-witted disciple hurriedly said. "This disciple and the others saw that this thing was very good, so we wanted to collect some to refine it, but we did not have a suitable magic tool, and the other senior brothers were not nearby, so we could only use magic to extract it, and in the end, we even alarmed the strange beast. If it weren't for martial uncle, I'm afraid we would have perished here." There were too many Fortune Gate's disciples nowadays, and Xiaohua did not know who these disciples were, but since they were Fortune Gate's disciples, Xiaohua would not treat them lightly. Hearing this disciple's words, Xiaohua smiled faintly. His Taoist robe fluttered, and the universe in the sleeve technique was executed. A giant hand appeared and covered the hills within several hundred li. Wherever the magic power went, strands of crystal light were pulled out from the ground. In just a short moment, all the hills dimmed, and the 70% of the light strands in the air condensed into a big ball of light. -13. Chapter 4196. With a sweep of his divine sense, Xiaohua divided the ball of light into a small half. His big hand once again grabbed the air, and the small half of the ball of light turned into thousands of tiny fireflies. These fireflies were like fireflies that flew to the front of each disciple. "You all can take one each. If you have the opportunity, you can collect some extreme magnetic origin light, and use our sex refining techniques to refine a secret technique similar to the soul-slaying origin light." As Xiaohua spoke, he took out the sword gourd and raised his hand. The 7-colored ball of light fell into the sword gourd. Xiaohua put away the sword gourd and said to the disciples with a smile. The disciples were overjoyed. They all opened their mouths, and the 7-colored light entered their bodies. Then they all bowed and thanked him. "Okay, this old man still has some things to do. You all can go ahead according to the plan," Xiaohua ordered again. "This is a rare trip, different from the previous Great War of Ruins. This continent is full of treasures used by our sex cultivators. While you all complete the sex orders, don't treat yourselves unfairly." "Hee, we understand." The disciples were all cultivators of the 4th or 5th level of essence energy. How could they not recognize treasures? After walking for so long, they had already collected many good things in their Qianquan bags and spatial rings. Now that they heard Xiaohua's words, they all smiled and happily agreed. Then, Xiaohua didn't stay any longer. His figure soared into the sky, turning into a rainbow bridge and disappearing from the place where the full moon fell. The night breeze brushed against one's face, the moonlight was like frost, and the faint cries of beasts could be heard from time to time under the pitch-black sky. A strange desolation gradually disappeared in the night. Before dawn, there was always a silent darkness. Not only did it melt one's eyes, it also made one's heart slowly turn cold. Xiaohua didn't teleport, nor did he deliberately use an escape technique. Instead, he casually floated in the sky. His spiritual sense swam along with the night wind in the dark night, sweeping past mountain after mountain, sweeping past layer after layer of forests. The changing scenery did not allow Xiaohua's mind to relax a little. Instead, under the immersion of the night, it became even heavier. Not only because there was no news of Dragon Vein Xiaohua and Phoenix Body Xiaohua, but also because this mysterious continent revealed many indescribable strangeness. Moreover, the strangest thing was that there were no humans on this continent. It had been several months since Xiaohua arrived here. Although his divine senses range was not large, the Fortune Gate's disciples had traversed quite a distance in these few months, and within this range, he had not found a single human. Although Xiaohua also knew that the wilderness wasn't a paradise for the human race, when he was faced with such a continent, as a human, he felt a sense of loneliness. It was hard for him to imagine what kind of continent it would be without humans, and what kind of vitality there would be in a land without humans. The reason Xiaohua had ordered the Fortune Gate disciples to search for a suitable place for the human race was because he wanted to find a suitable place for the incense cult disciples to establish their sect. He wanted them to adapt to the environment before they could integrate into the mainland, and then interact with other human races. However, after flying for such a long time, he did not find any signs of human habitation. He began to mutter in his heart. Was a world without water suitable for the disciples of the incense cult to live in? After flying for the time it took to finish a meal, a red sun rose from the horizon in Xiaohua's left hand. Xiaohua opened his mouth, and a stream of sun essence energy entered his abdomen. Pure yang energy instantly rushed into his body, and even entered his nascent soul. Flames flickered in Xiaohua's eyes, and a powerful aura also flashed from his body, falling into the void. Looking at the splendor of the sun, it was as if a large bright hand had easily lifted the curtain of night on the earth. In the sunlight, all kinds of noises could be heard from the ground. Along with the noises, vitality could be felt from all parts of the earth. All kinds of heat also gradually filled the air, causing the gloominess in Xiaohua's heart to fade slightly. Aoo! Just as Xiaohua's mood was getting better, he heard an angry roar coming from the mountain range in the distance. A monster that was several thousand feet tall stretched out its neck from the mountain ridge. Its head that was several thousand feet in size opened its bloody mouth and blocked Xiaohua's path. Damn it! Xiaohua looked at the monster's mouth that was much bigger than his body, and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He cursed. Could it be that this is the early bird that gets the worm? It's fine if it can fill the stomach, but this Xiao can't even fill the gap between your teeth. Why are you drooling so much? That monster didn't care what Xiaohua was thinking. Its head flew across the sky, and fiercely pounced towards Xiaohua. The stench in its mouth really polluted the cool morning. Looking at the monster's head, and the three half-awake eyes on its head, Xiaohua faintly smiled, and urged his body to rush towards the monster's big mouth. However, when he approached the monster's head, Xiaohua's flying direction suddenly changed, and turned to his right hand. That monster naturally wouldn't let Xiaohua go, and closely followed Xiaohua's figure. Xiaohua seemed to be teasing the monster, and flew neither fast nor slow. When the monster's big mouth arrived, he once again sped up slightly, and flew towards the front right. Like this, Xiaohua flew around the monster's body a few times, and his figure suddenly accelerated, flying straight towards the middle of the monster's neck. The monster became anxious from Xiaohua's teasing. Seeing that Xiaohua was about to escape again, the monster's head quickly chased after him. Ha ha! Xiaohua only flew a few hundred zhang, and his figure suddenly stopped in midair. He somewhat proudly turned his head and laughed. The morning is such a good time, and it's time to dress up. Little friend, you should slowly dress up. After saying that, Xiaohua's figure once again soared into the sky. Looking behind him, the strange monster's 1,000-zhang-long neck was tied in a knot. Now, no matter how it struggled, it couldn't pull its head out of the knot, so how could it chase after Xiaohua? Xiaohua, who had easily teased the monster, was in a good mood. Flying in midair, he made a decision. The reason why my human race can survive is not because of the level of strength, but because of the intelligence. Although this wilderness is dangerous, as long as there is a suitable place for survival, the incense religion's disciples will not have too much of a problem establishing a sect here. Having made his decision, Xiaohua once again sped up, but his divine sense still remained vigilant within 1,000 li of his body. After flying for more than 10 days, there was still no news of Dragon Vein Xiaohua or Phoenix Body Xiaohua. Xiaohua also didn't have any perception of them. During this period, Xiaohua also encountered a lot of strange beasts, but Xiaohua didn't continue to fight. He either released his pressure, or teleported away, and left the battle early on. Moreover, along the way, Xiaohua also didn't find any traces of a river, as if there was no water on this continent. Xiaohua stopped in midair and looked up at the scorching sun hanging above his head, as well as the cloudless blue sky. He was a little hesitant. Judging from the direction of the brilliance of the secret treasure, Xiaohua was flying in the right direction. However, after flying for so long, he still couldn't find any trace of the secret treasure. Xiaohua couldn't help but mutter in his heart. He really didn't have any confidence in his sense of direction. Maybe I should find a prehistoric beast and ask. Xiaohua pondered for a moment before slapping the top of his own head, releasing the pressure of a grand ascension stage cultivator. Furthermore, Xiaohua waved a hand through the air, and layers of lightning appeared out of thin air, encompassing an area of several thousand kilometers. Rumble! Countless bolts of lightning crashed down toward the mountain range on the ground. For some reason, the lightning was more than 30% denser than the lightning in the ruins. Moreover, the lightning struck the mountain range, almost tearing off the surface of the mountain range. Its power was also much greater. However, after the lightning, the whole world fell silent. Xiaohua's pressure felt that there were some strange beasts in the mountain range, but these strange beasts were scared to death by the lightning, and none of them dared to come out. Xiaohua was helpless. He flew forward for tens of thousands of li and tried the same trick again, trying to force one or two strange beasts out. However, after flying for hundreds of thousands of li, Xiaohua still couldn't force out a single strange beast that dared to confront him. No way! Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Has my strength reached the point where I can sweep across the wilderness? Previously, I didn't want to disturb strange beasts, but instead, strange beasts walked right into my trap. Now I want to find a few strange beasts, but I can't find any. Is this the rhythm of my luck running out? Of course, Xiaohua's thoughts were just a kind of self-mockery. He didn't think that a Mahayana cultivator could sweep across the wilderness, even if it was a continent of the wilderness. Sure enough, after half a day, Xiaohua's pressure swept across a mountain forest. Before the divine lightning of the 9 heavens fell, an obscure sound came from the mountain forest. This sound was like rolling thunder, and as soon as it was born, it caused a phenomenon. Countless worlds' essence chi condensed into large and small crystal beads that fell towards the mountain forest. Xiaohua was shocked. He couldn't draw world's essence chi from the place where he used his magic power. This domain was more powerful than the one Xiaohua had seen before. At the same time, a star's essence chi swept over. Although it was slow, it was as thick as a star. When Xiaohua's divine sense came into contact with this essence chi, it was like a breeze coming into contact with a mountain. There was no possibility of shaking it. Xiaohua didn't dare to stay any longer. He used his magic power to teleport. Unfortunately, Xiaohua was now under the control of this crystal bead. His body swayed twice, but he didn't fall into the void. Helpless, Xiaohua once again used the lightning escape technique. Rumble! In the faint sound of thunder, Xiaohua's body was suddenly elongated, and even somewhat distorted. Then, countless threads of lightning appeared from his body, pulling Xiaohua's body out of the quagmire of crystal bead. Then, Xiaohua's body turned into a series of afterimages, whistling as he rushed into the sky. Ha! An abnormally hoarse sound strangely came from all over the mountain forest. High up in the sky, countless crystal beads appeared even faster than lightning, directly chasing in the direction that Xiaohua had fled in. Within the crystal beads, the void collapsed, and Xiaohua's Taoist robe was revealed. The strange beast hadn't revealed itself yet, but the sound forced Xiaohua out of the void. 13. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.